I'm not the boy.
I'm not the boy.
I'm not the boy.
I'm not the boy.
Hello everyone, Snickety here. The Neo Geo Pocket was a short-lived handheld game system by SNK that was released in 1998, or 99 for the Pocket Color model. I had one as a kid. It was glorious. Its clicky thumbstick still hasn't been matched in tactile brilliance to this very day. But there was just one problem. I only ever had a single game for it, Sonic Pocket Adventure. I got this with the handheld and my mum was going to get me another one a week later, but by then the thing had already vanished from the shop. I think it was Game Station, a name that will elicit some nostalgia for any millennial gamers from the UK. Granted, if you can only have one game for this thing, Sonic isn't a bad choice at all. Still, I always wondered what other games were on here. For years it held this mystique to me that I just couldn't shake. I had to know. Well, as it turns out, it was a bit of a failure for SNK and wasn't able to dethrone the Game Boy Color as the top dog of the handheld market. That last part was probably a foregone conclusion though. I don't even think it was able to outsell the Bandai WonderSwan, and that thing never even left Japan. This is probably why all the games vanished from the Game Station that day. A day of disappointment that will live on in my memory forever. In this video, I'm going to finally satiate this curiosity of mine. We're going to take a look at every single game that was ever released for this handheld. Before we do that though, we first need to figure out how many of them there are. It's a question that's a tad more complicated than it initially seems. The original black and white Neo Geo Pocket system wasn't around for very long, and was quickly replaced by the much more popular Neo Geo Pocket Color only 5 months later. This was most likely because the Big N had released the Game Boy Color around the same time. The Neo Geo Pocket was still a more powerful handheld even without colour, but the comparison no doubt scared SNK enough to get it out as soon as possible. The original Neo Geo Pocket only received a meager 9 games. It was forwards compatible with some of the colour games though, in black and white of course, and the colour was backwards compatible with all 9 of the original black and white titles. However, most of these were later re-released with native colour graphics. This is the only difference between the versions though, so they can't really be considered different games entirely. As such, in these cases, I am only going to be talking about the colour versions. Only King of Fighters R1, Melon-chan's Growth Diary, and Samurai Showdown were left in black and white. Interestingly, there's some things that you can only see by playing a colour cartridge on the black and white handheld. Usually it's just a cute animation telling you the game isn't compatible, but sometimes you get something that's a little more substantial. King of Fighters Battle the Paradise as a secret remake of the 1979 arcade game Yosaku. Does this count as a separate game? I don't know, but it's pretty fun regardless. And then we have games that were released as 2 versions, like Dive Alert and Card Fighters Clash. Are these one game or 2? A lot of the Pachi-Slot games are also just reskins of each other. Should all of these not be considered separate games? If you consider every boxed release of a game that isn't a colour re-release to be a single title, then we have 76 games in all. I did try to play through all of them in their entirety, but sometimes that just wasn't possible. Either because the game doesn't have an ending, or I lack the skills to reach it. For example, what is the ending of Pac-Man? The kill screen? Yeah, I'm not reaching that. I tried to give them all a fair shot. I also played most of them on original hardware via a flash cart. This is not my original Neo Geo Pocket, but a newer one I bought like a decade ago. I think I lost the other one. I can hardly get good footage of this though, so most of what you're going to be seeing is from an emulator. So without further ado, let's go through them all in chronological Japanese release order. This will take a while. You can't have an SNK system without a good selection of fighting games. It is their bread and butter after all. Even though the handheld was only around for just over a couple years, it managed to get 8 of them from nearly every prominent SNK fighting game series. This is known as the Pocket Fighting series, although the name was later phased out towards the end of its run. It all begins with a launch game, King of Fighters R1, or Round 1. It's pretty much just a conversion of one of the most acclaimed entries in the series, the King of Fighters 97. It features the same storyline, only with far fewer teams and characters. The game's specific teams have been removed except for some single-entry fan favourites, like Leona from the Ikari Warriors team and Athena from the Psycho Soldier team. There's no Andy Bogard or Joe Higashi either, so we're just left with Terry. It's a pretty thin, unambitious roster, something that these games would improve upon as they went along. There aren't too many modes to choose from either. Just a team arcade mode and a singles arcade mode, plus 2-player matches via the link cable. The only thing in the way of unlockable content to keep you playing are the Orochi variants of some of the characters. You need to beat the game with every team to get them all. It might seem like a disappointing package, but the actual gameplay is absolute fire. It's probably hard to appreciate nowadays, but this was a huge step up from any other handheld fighting game from the era. These were big, flashy arcade games with lots of buttons and nuances to its inputs, none of which translated particularly well to a small screen with only a couple buttons. Quite simply, you could not find a good fighting game on the Game Boy, the Game Gear, the Atari Lynx, and certainly not the Gamecom. It just didn't exist. Although Takara did make a very admirable effort with their Game Boy port of KOF 96. For the most part though, they were all janky, ugly looking, and a far cry from the arcade cabinets they were based on. The Neo Geo Pocket, first and foremost, was a solution to that problem, and a damn good one at that. Its clicky micro switches allowed for all of those crazy fighting game inputs with comfort and ease. It isn't quite a one-for-one recreation of the arcade games, but finally the responsiveness and style was achieved. The essence of the genre was retained. The Neo Geo Pocket still only has a couple buttons to make use of though, not including the options button. In hindsight, they should have added a third one so that the options button isn't used for anything except pausing, but they make do regardless. A is punch and B is kick. You can either tap them or hold them down for a weak or strong attack respectively. Pressing both buttons produces a heavy attack. Most other things are determined by directional inputs, which are largely the same as they are in other iterations. The characters are all super deformed versions of their arcade counterparts. Not only does it do a great job of emphasizing clarity on a tiny display, but it's also really cute. This is the graphical style used across the entirety of the Pocket Fighting series. The backgrounds, on the other hand, are much less impressive. They're so washed out they practically disappear into the, well, background. This is probably for the best though, to make the actual character sprites pop more. It's a good game with some smooth gameplay, even if it does feel a bit bare bones compared to later releases. Contrary to popular belief, the monochrome Neo Geo Pocket did release in Western regions, just not nearly to the same extent as the colour model. R1 is one of the few English titles that you can find for it. I actually didn't know this until fairly recently because I own the Japanese version. Baseball Stars is a handheld conversion of SNK's baseball series that started on the NES. It's not a port of any existing game in the series, more of a scaled down rendition that's meant to be played in short bursts. Although personally I can't think of any sport less suited to portability than baseball, which typically has games that can go on forever. No, really. Since there's no time limit, you can, in theory, keep going until Doomsday. Unfortunately, there's no way to save your progress mid-inning, so you have no choice but to lock in. Baseball Stars is rather bare bones. The one-player mode has you playing against random opponents one after the other until you've defeated them all. The gameplay is about as simple as an arcadey style baseball game can be, I suppose. Which is to say, not very simple at all. You have two main views. A mid-range view of the batter and pitcher, and then this bird's eye view of the entire field where all the players look like ants. Controlling your fielders is probably my least favourite part of the gameplay. Even with the game telling you where the ball is going to land, it feels very difficult actually moving these tiny sprites into position. I usually run straight past the ball and give the other team a free run or two. On top of that, you also need to quickly decide which base to throw the ball to, which is determined by the direction you're holding when you throw. If you jump the gun before he actually picks up the ball though, you end up diving straight past it like an idiot. There's like a million different things that can go wrong here, and I couldn't help but think that maybe it could have been done better. The pitching and batting side of things feels more polished in comparison. you're able to sub in special pitchers or hitters that are at the top of their game. All of your players have statuses that you can keep track of. These things seem to hold a lot more sway over what your player can do than your own gameplay. For those willing to throw themselves into it, I'm sure there's something really fun here. I wasn't really feeling it though. I played game after game, hoping it would eventually grow on me, but it never did. So, you probably want to see what a home run looks like. I only managed to pull off one of these, so you better appreciate it. Melon-chan's Growth Diary is a social sim where you take care of and raise a little alien girl. Think of it like a Tamagotchi, only instead of some kind of creature, it's a little chibi girl named Melon-chan. You must feed her, send her to school, and tell her to go to bed when the time calls for it. I'm not sure what happens if you neglect her too much. She's simply too cute, I can't bring myself to starve her on purpose. Her hunger seems to be indicated by this circle gauge on the bottom right, and it depletes whenever she does any stat-raising activities, such as studying or taking a bath. You can actually walk in on her whenever she's in the bathroom, funnily enough, and her reaction is exactly what it should be. You can leave the house and visit other places, such as the school, hospital and shops for buying food and what I assume are stat-raising items. This one is entirely in Japanese if you haven't noticed, so there are many aspects of it that are a mystery to me. I did notice that depending on how you raise your Melon-chan, her appearance will change. If she spends a lot of time studying, she'll become a glasses-wearing bookworm like Sachiko. I really like the graphics here, particularly in the environments. They're simplistic yet noticeably stylized, using strange architecture and negative space. It takes full advantage of the monochrome display. I can see why it was never re-released in colour like some other games. Unfortunately, this game was a bit broken on my emulator with missing text and graphics in places. It's all there on the actual handheld though. At any rate, Melon-chan's Growth Diary is a cute game. It's slightly dull in places since you don't have a whole lot to do while she's sleeping, and it's the only game on the handheld that scratches that Tamagotchi itch that was all the rage back in the 90s.
Neo Geo Cup 98!
Neo Geo Cup 98 is a conversion of the arcade and Neo Geo AES game of the same name. It's a footy game, innit? Or as the Americans call it, soccer. Unlike the arcade game, it has this top-down view. A very zoomed-in top-down view that shows the players in much more detail than you'd expect from a handheld. It's graphically very impressive to be sure, but it comes at the expense of clarity. You can only see a small part of the pitch at any given time, leaving you completely in the dark as to the whereabouts of your teammates. You can memorise the positions you set up beforehand, but in my experience they're never where you expect them to be, leaving you no choice but to pass the ball on a prayer most of the time. To be honest, I'm not sure how much of this is the game's fault. I am pretty terrible at football, both in real life and in this SNK-ified simulation of it. My brother is probably laughing at my ludicrous display right now. Look at how upset Goku is.
Oh no!
Regardless, there's a lot of bad game design choices here that cannot simply be dismissed as a skill issue. The game switches your control to the nearest player to the ball automatically, which can severely disorient you when there's two teammates in close proximity. You can also move your players before you can even see them on screen, so it's better to just let go of the stick and leave the AI to control them until they get close to the ball. It's all pretty finicky and takes some getting used to. But unfortunately, there's no difficulty curve to ease you into things, not even in its story mode. The CPU is brutal right from the get-go and feels overwhelmingly dominant. They all have better stats, can outrun you, and are way better at positioning their players. Probably because the CPU actually knows where all of its players are in relation to each other. Getting anything by the goalie feels impossible, and because of how little you can see, you need to get right up in their face to shoot. Even when I was playing this against a friend, neither of us were able to get anything in the net. Every game came to an unsatisfying draw. We eventually decided that it was best to just let someone score a goal just to see what it looks like. National pride wouldn't allow us to take a dive of our own teams, so we just picked Italy and Holland. And guess what? We still couldn't score a goal. It's absolutely unplayable. It does have a good art style and some really nice graphics though. There's a story mode where you can pick a team and try to win the totally unlicensed World Cup. There's some RPG elements here, like an item shop that allows you to buy gear to micromanage your players. Amusingly, random events can occur, like one of your players suddenly getting indisposed by food poisoning and being stuck on the shitter for the rest of the game. I didn't get very far into this mode. After an embarrassing 3-0 defeat against Argentina, I came to the conclusion that it just wasn't meant to be. Puzzle Link by Yume Kobo was the first puzzle game on the system, and unlike many that came after, was an original series made specifically for the handheld. It has this very cute art style with expressive characters that jump out at you even on its small, non-backlit screen, more so in the colorized version of the game. This one in particular greatly benefits from the addition of colour. It makes parsing the different patterns ever so slightly easier, which makes a world of difference when you turn up the difficulty. But even in monochrome, the blocks are easy enough to tell apart. The objective is to clear the blocks before they can overwhelm you. You do this by joining together sets of blocks that are not already touching with a line that is the same type as the blocks you want to connect. The type of line you shoot corresponds to whatever is directly above you. Getting the correct type can be a challenge in of itself that you have to work around sometimes, like when there's a different block on top of the ones you want to connect. It's a tad more complicated than it appears at first glance, but trust me, once you get into the flow of things, it becomes like second nature. Stages only end once you're able to connect the two clear blocks together. This game starts off easy enough, but quickly starts ramping up the speed. In the latter half of the game, you have very little time to think or act before the entire stage is bearing down on you. Even connecting blocks that are too far apart can prove to be a fatal tactical error. You have to play it smart and go for quick and easy clears that lead to big chain reactions. Because it's only during these moments where blocks are clearing that you have time to take a breath and plan out your next move. There is a sneaky little trick that will make this game much more manageable though. Admittedly, it's the only reason I was able to beat this game. You're allowed to pause. Usually in puzzle games, this makes the board invisible to stop you from cheating. But the developers of this one either forgot to add that or intentionally left it out. Considering the sequel lets you do the same thing, I'm leaning more towards the latter. Believe it or not though, even this won't save you in some of the harder stages, where poor decision making becomes your main undoing. Your only penalty for pause scumming, as I call it, is that you have to listen to the music stop and start over and over again. Puzzle Link is a lot of fun. Most actions lead to these big, screen-clearing chain reactions that you may not have intended but are no less satisfying. The main mode has some replay value to it with the cards you collect by beating stages quickly. You can't do anything with them other than collect them. There's also another mode that has you clearing preset blocks in a certain number of moves. This one's just all around good vibes, and I dare say it's my favourite of the NGP launch titles. Definitely worth having in your collection. Pocket Tennis is, curiously, not a handheld conversion of an existing SNK arcade series, unlike the other games in the Pocket Sports range of titles. It almost seems too vanilla at first glance. A generic sports game without much to offer anyone not already looking for a dedicated tennis experience. However, if you dig a little deeper, you'll find a highly addictive, fun and approachable game that can be enjoyed by all. There's a lot of understated personality to it as well. The art style on the cover is kind of ugly, but the actual in-game sprites are very cute and expressive. One of the characters is a maid with a frying pan. I'm not seeing things right, she's holding a frying pan, which then turns into a racket when you actually play as her. You choose a character to take with you into either a quick exhibition match or the tournament mode. This has you playing against 3 opponents in one-set matches to win a trophy. The tournament that you enter isn't based on any kind of linear progression. It's actually based on what month you're playing it. There are special cups that can only be accessed during certain seasons and zodiac signs, so you can't sit down and play this game all in one sitting. Its simple, arcadey gameplay certainly lends itself to the sporadic way you're meant to play it. The A button is a fast volley, and the B button is a slower, higher lob. The ball will veer in the direction you're holding when the shot is made. Hitting the ball when it's been lobbed will result in a smash. Apologies if my terminology isn't quite correct, my tennis knowledge begins and ends with aim for the ace, which the Neo Geo Pocket selection makes a reference to, funnily enough. I at least know the main thing you want to be doing is hitting the ball where your opponent isn't. The controls are solid, and the gameplay has a nice, reliable feel to it. It's satisfying and just plain cool, even if the difficulty is on the lower side. The CPU will rarely dive for the ball or smash it back at you. They seem happy to just let the ball soar past them a lot of the time, like their heart just isn't in it anymore. Maybe there's some secret hard tournaments that I didn't come across, but all the ones I did play were a breeze. A pleasant breeze though. It's great if you just want something simple and fun, but those looking for something with more substance should look elsewhere. The characters all have their own stats with subtle differences, but they all fall into one of two archetypes: speed and power types. The speed characters can cover a lot of ground at the expense of power, while the power characters can hit harder to return volleys. There's also a third stat with defense, but I'm not exactly sure what it does, if anything at all. There are secret characters that you can unlock by defeating them during a tournament as the final opponent. The first of these is the Amoeba. It just shows up and politely asks for a match without explanation, and nobody seems to question it. The big fat guy named Karu is pretty interesting. His playstyle is focused entirely on power since he can't get around the core easily. Too much McDonald's. I wish there were more of these kinds of gimmicky characters, but after these two, that's your lot. There's no doubles to speak of, and only 5 different courts to choose from. Overall though, it's a great portable tennis game that I find myself coming back to quite often. Makes for a nice break while editing this long ass video. Sadly, I am not in fact an elderly Japanese man, nor am I Hifumi Togo from Persona 5. So I don't actually know how to play shogi. I hear it's just chess, but with much worse pieces. Regardless, I couldn't even begin to put up a competitive match against the CPU. They definitely know how to play. Shogi no Tatsujin, Master of Shogi, was originally an arcade game by ADK that featured live-action animations of your opponents reacting to the game. This aspect is obviously not included in the Neo Geo Pocket conversion, even though there is a character select screen. You never see them outside of this though, so what's even the point? It's a game acclaimed for its authentic shogi gameplay, and that remains largely the same here. There's a simplified sandwich shogi mode, which I imagine allows you to have a quick portable match against either the CPU or an actual opponent. I must say, the music is pretty terrible here.
Turn it off. Turn it off!
It's impossible to ignore that gambling games was a huge part of the Neo Geo Pocket's library and made up a significant portion of its games. There was gambling everywhere, even in the Sonic game. I don't know why exactly this is the case, but I do have a theory.
Asians love gambling.
If you thought I was going to skip these because they're boring or whatever, think again. Every Neo Geo Pocket game means every Neo Geo Pocket game. Dyna's Pocket Casino series, as it was called, is dedicated entirely to putting the authentic casino experience in the palm of your hand. The first game in this series is Neo Cherry Master, a slot machine. Yeah, I know, riveting stuff, right? The slots famously don't have any kind of strategy to them, it's all down to luck, so how does one go about becoming a master of them? These are the kind of thoughts I had while I watched the fruit spin and come to a stop over and over again. Mostly though, I was pondering something that all of you watching this video have likely already thought. What is the point? I know what the point of real gambling is, it's to make money, obviously. I may not be the kind of person who would bet everything on black, but I can at least understand the thrill in doing so. There's something big on the line, you have absolutely everything to gain and everything to lose. But here, in these tiny pocket renditions of the real thing, the only loss is whatever you paid for the game. Which given eBay prices these days might be a fortune. And that's assuming you're not emulating or playing on a flash cart like I am. Once you take the actual stakes out of playing a slot machine, what's even left? Is there anyone out there who enjoys slot machines enough to play a completely safe version where you can't even lose money? Even if you go broke here, it isn't a game over. You just insert more credits infinitely, which I choose to interpret as taking a loan from the mob. There are higher stakes in playing the slots in Persona 2 than there is this game. A feature all of these have is that they let you enter your name when you start a new game. You might think that this means there's some kind of story mode to progress through, but it's just so you can save your earnings and have multiple save files. Why you'd want to do this when you can't even do anything with it is beyond me. Maybe you just want to show off to your friends how much of a cherry master you really are. Hopefully those skills transfer to a real slot machine, eh? My goal with this was to get a 777, but I think it's about as rare in this game as it is in real life. Another flagship series that launched alongside the monochrome Neo Geo Pocket was Samurai Showdown. Like KOF R1, this is also an adaptation of a previous game in the series, namely Samurai Showdown 4. The black and white graphics feels very appropriate for this one. It's evoking a classic Kurosawa samurai film, which radically alters the tone and somehow makes it feel more grounded. I like it. It's all about timing your heavy attacks to do massive amounts of damage, while taking advantage of the power meter to chip off even more. You can take out more than half of your opponent's health with a well-executed critical. Parries are much more important here than in any other fighting game. It's all about life and death split-second decisions, just like in a real samurai duel. My mind often goes to the final scene of Sanjuro. Otherwise, I've never been too enamoured by the Pocket's version of Samurai Showdown. You lose a lot more of the visual and audio flair from the arcade games than you do with KOF. The handheld just can't reproduce the satisfying sound of katanas clashing together. Moreover, it feels a lot slower and lumbering than the arcade game and just all around less fun to play. I'm an Akaruru main, but I just can't get over how crap she is to play here. Annoyingly, there isn't anywhere for you to practice really. Even the first opponent in the beginner mode, on easy, will not give you any breathing room. Your only choice is to join up with a friend, I suppose. Good luck with that. It does feature a survival mode, so it is a little less bare bones than KOF R1 at least, even if it does have slightly less characters to choose from. Notably, it's missing Charlotte, among some others from the game it's adapting. Once you beat the game, you're given a cheat code for playing as the boss character, Zankuro Minazuki, who is an absolute beast. On the hard mode, you're instead given a code for playing as Shiki. Why they're cheat codes and not just unlockables that save to the cartridge is a mystery to me. This is a good game, but it's definitely one of the weaker ones in the Pocket Fighting series. You'd think that King of Fighters R2 would greatly expand on the first game, but aside from the addition of colour, there isn't much to write home about. The roster doesn't even get a significant expansion. It's actually the same size as R1, only with Chizuru and Kim Kafwan swapped out for Kasumi Todo and Saisyu Kusanagi. I suppose they were unfortunate victims of memory limitations. Just as the first game was a conversion of KOF 97, this one is using KOF 98 as its basis, complete with a final confrontation against Omega Rugal in the story mode. He's not nearly as difficult here as he was in the arcade game. The difficulty of these handheld fighters in general is a lot lower, most likely because they're not trying to drain you with coins. There really isn't much to say about this one. Its gameplay is largely identical to R1, and I only say largely because I can't be certain it's not identical. All the moves and mechanics are the same as far as I can tell. By the way, I like this new art style used by the cover and manual. Very clean. The only other significant addition is Making Mode, where you can create your own hero using one of the characters as a base. This is no longer Terry Bogard, but a completely original character with his own goals and aspirations. His name is Dave. Mai doesn't feel like playing along though. She keeps telling me to drop the LARP. This is basically an RPG mode where you earn new skills from fights and gradually become more powerful. It sounds interesting, but it's really not. Whatever character you pick still has their pre-existing moveset from the get-go. You can only equip them with a maximum of 2 custom moves. These skills also come with their own downsides, which is a strange design choice in a mode where the odds are always stacked against you. It's you versus an entire team of characters, plus a 4th opponent that comes in to serve as a boss fight at the end. It's a bizarrely designed mode. You even have to earn the right to change your battle quotes, which should just be a given. I can't be Dave if Dave is going around saying Terry Bogard things. There, that's better. This mode was evidently an afterthought. R2 was a quick sequel to accompany the launch of the Neo Geo Pocket Color. It's even the game featured on the cover art for the handheld itself. This alone gives the game a legendary status in my mind. I only own Sonic myself, as I mentioned, so this was the only evidence I had that there was indeed more than one game released for this thing, as silly as that sounds now. It's worth noting that they picked one of the more visually striking stages added to the game. The backgrounds can now hold their own against the character sprites. They're now much more detailed than them, creating this clear separation between the two. This would be one of the defining features of the Neo Geo Pocket's graphics. The arrival of colour brought us more casino games from Dyna in the Pocket Casino series. Neo Dragon's Wild has us playing poker this time around, so it's way more interesting by default. By the way, I've noticed that all of these casino games reuse the same music, and honestly it's my favourite part. I was playing this one for like a solid hour, going for a royal flush before a friend of mine informed me of how statistically unlikely that is. Neo Mystery Bonus is pretty much identical to Neo Cherry Master, only this time there are question marks on the slot machine. I assume this is the eponymous Mystery Bonus. No, I never did manage to get 3 of them to find out what it is. It could be anything, for all I know. This was in the other games too, but when you win, there's a double up game where you can potentially double your earnings or lose everything. I actually managed to get a 777 while playing this, but immediately lost it all when I pressed the wrong button and was taken to this screen, which I lost. Oh well, easy come, easy go. It's not like I could withdraw my fake credits from the casino in the first place. I think that's the main problem with these games. It needs some incentive for you to make more cautious bets like you would in real life. Otherwise, there's no reason not to play in the most risky, self-destructive way possible, like when I kept going for a royal flush earlier. If there was some game outside of the casino that your credits could be used for, I would probably approach things a little differently. Anyway, I'm sure you're tired of me talking about casinos for now, so let's move on to an actual game. Puzzle Bobble Mini, or Buster Move Pocket as it's known in the US, is a handheld conversion of the arcade series of the same name. It's not really a port of any existing Puzzle Bobble game and seems to be mostly made up of original levels, although I did spot a few lifted from other games here and there. If you've ever played one of these, you should know what to expect. You shoot bubbles upwards and match them with ones of the same colour to clear them. There's a lot of strategy and technique behind it, since many bubbles can be cleared at once if the ones supporting them disappear. This can usually be accomplished by bouncing them off walls to get them into hard to reach places. On your first try, there's always a guide that shows you their trajectory. This vanishes though after you clear a stage, leaving you to figure it out for yourself. Because of how the puzzle mode works though, there's nothing stopping you from just selecting retry to bring it back. The fact that it vanishes is now a minor inconvenience more than anything. At least in the arcade games, your credits would be on the line, so there was an actual incentive for you to get better at it. There's 99 levels to clear in the puzzle mode, and you're encouraged to replay them to improve your times. There's also a survival mode that resembles more of an arcadey type of experience. It's not a bad game by any means, but it is a lackluster conversion that doesn't play to the Neo Geo Pocket's strengths, at least on the actual handheld. Bubbles appear too small and their colours often bleed together, making them hard to distinguish. This is especially apparent with the grey and green bubbles for some reason. I just have to squint my eyes and do a double take to tell these two apart, which is obviously not ideal when the stage is quickly falling towards you. Furthermore, the usually wonderful clicky stick is woefully inadequate here. Those micro switches just don't allow for enough nuance in the movement to line up difficult shots. It really drags down the gameplay and makes it feel like a watered down, compromised version of Puzzle Bobble. When you're playing on original hardware, that is. This is actually the only game where my experience on an emulator gave me a completely different impression of it. All of those problems go away when you blow up the picture and have a different controller. But at that point, why not just play the actual arcade game instead? They have better graphics and sound, and are just way crunchier to play. Regardless, it's still far from the worst game on the system, even if I have a hard time recommending it.
無限蘇生ダンジョンに繰り広げられる限りない冒険。強化パーツを手に入れて自分だけの最強ロボットユニトロンを作り上げろ。戦闘メカスーパーロープレイバイオモーターユニトロン。
Biomotor Unitron is the first real RPG for the system. It often gets described as SNK's answer to Pokemon on the handheld, and while a comparison isn't unwarranted, it also isn't entirely accurate either. It has one-on-one turn-based battles, and your goal is to become the very best, but the similarities end there. This has you building your own custom robot to take into battle and crawl through randomly generated dungeons. You pick a male or female protagonist, and the one you don't choose becomes your engineer. They can develop new weapons for your Unitron if you give them sufficient materials. The idea is that you buy basic weapons from the shop and then evolve them into something better. Experimentation is highly encouraged since this is how you go about leveling up your engineer. The stronger the weapon, the higher the chance that development will be a failure, and this is especially so if your engineer doesn't have enough experience. You can use tools in development to increase the chances for success, but anything below 50% may as well be zero, at least as far as I can tell. This is possibly to disincentivize you from save scumming to get the desired result. It's often hard to tell if what you're equipping is necessarily better because of the interface, so it's a good idea to take it into a dungeon to try it out. This is my favourite part of the gameplay because it's very easy to become overpowered. You can create an absolute beast that will obliterate everything in one turn. The parts that you equip are reflected in your battle sprite, allowing you to put together all sorts of funny combinations. The difficulty is easy to trivialise, as you might expect, particularly in the latter half of the game. The 4 dungeons on the world map are themed after the elements and are available right from the get-go. You can leave a dungeon at any time, and even if you're defeated, you just get booted back to your headquarters without losing anything. Because of this, the dungeons don't have any real stakes to make things interesting. It's just battle after battle, most of which are ended in a single turn, so it just becomes monotonous after a while. Fortunately, it does let you turn off animations to speed things up. Each dungeon has 7 areas with progressively tougher enemies and a boss fight at the end. You can go through them in any order you wish though. Your only purpose for being here is just to grind. It's only right near the end that the game starts having something resembling an actual plot with stakes. For the most part, it's about accruing money and resources so you can climb through the ranks of the tournament, with the end goal of becoming the Master of Masters. The plot is not an excuse to become overpowered, it is the plot. There's something to be said for really easy RPGs like these that just let you steamroll everything. And it's nice every once in a while, like junk food, but it's not something you can sustain yourself on. There's a short post-game where you go through all the same dungeons again, but there's nothing resembling a super boss that will force you to learn all of its mechanics. Once you've created the most powerful Unitron in existence, there's no reason to keep playing. Well, other than to battle your friend, I suppose. Good luck with that. I would recommend Biomotor Unitron, but there are better RPGs on the handheld, as we'll see. Crush Roller is a remake of ADK's 1981 arcade game of the same name. It's a Pac-Man clone essentially, where you try to paint the entire stage with your brush while avoiding the enemies. You can crush them with the roller, hence the title, which can also help you get around the stage quicker. It seems like a pretty basic arcade coin-op, but this is no simple conversion of the original, like the version of Pac-Man on here. The arcade sensibilities have been softened a bit to make it more accessible. You have unlimited continues to get through all 6 of its stages. There's a fair bit of replayability though, since these stages can branch off into alternate secret routes, making for radically different playthroughs. There's actually 25 stages in all. Furthermore, there's the addition of the Inksters, these annoying little creatures that show up just to undo your hard work with their vandalism. If you can catch them though, they get added to your collection. I'm particularly fond of Kamzo the dog. Class, dog. Favourite thing, horse races. Talent, breaking the house. Graphically, it's very appealing. The colours are vibrant and the stages all have their own distinct look. This game really takes advantage of the Pocket Color to breathe new life into the arcade original. It's considered one of the better titles on the handheld, and for good reason, but personally I'm not a fan. Its final stage is far too difficult and just makes me not want to replay it. There are some frustrating design choices. Corners have to be painted in two directions to get rid of the tiny unpainted sections, which are often hard to make out on the Pocket's small screen. There are also areas underneath bridges that are always out of sight. That final stage is especially annoying with these. Above all though, I hate that some enemies can outrun you. Feels incredibly cheap. Still, I think I would choose this game over Pac-Man. It does after all have Kamzo the dog. Neo Derby Champ Dioso was one of the tougher games for me to crack. It's all Japanese tables, menus, and a bunch of other stuff that I can't read, coupled with the fact that I don't know a whole lot about horse racing in the first place. It's all indecipherable as far as I'm concerned, but basically it's a horse betting simulator. You look at odds tables, track conditions, and other miscellaneous information to inform your decision making. Once you're done, you put down money on an horse and then you watch the races. There's a terminology and trivia guide to help out new players. Also, for some reason, you can enter your birthday to get a daily horoscope. I guess you do need to place a bit of stock in that to be gambling. Is today your lucky day? Who knows? These kinds of games were pretty popular in Japan around this time. Dokodemo Mahjong by ADK is the first of 3 Mahjong games on the system, and possibly its least interesting. It is, however, the only one that features 4 players, curiously enough, which is the ideal amount of players in Mahjong so you can make use of all the available tiles. On second thought, maybe this is the purest, most authentic Mahjong experience on the handheld. Then again, it also has a wacky cast of characters to choose from, and some of them even have their own special moves. Very few of them actually look like Mahjong players. This guy's a robot. And is it just me, or is the art style very inconsistent on these portraits? In terms of features, it's pretty basic, like those casino games, and doesn't have much in the way of single player content. Another classic SNK fighting game series would see its debut in the Pocket Color with Fatal Fury First Contact. What does the subtitle mean? Is this some kind of prequel? Well, it's not anything because there's no story to this game whatsoever. You fight your way up to Geese Howard, and once you beat him, there's just a generic congratulations screen. You don't even get to see him fall off a rooftop. How disappointing. If you thought KOF R2 was lacking in content, First Contact takes it a step further by only having an arcade and versus mode. There's nothing else to do outside of that. There are some secret characters to strive towards, but the unlock conditions for them are hardcore. It's stuff you would never figure out on your own. The roster is similar to Fatal Fury Real Bout 2. We have Rick Stroud and Lee Zhangfei, neither of which appear in any other game on this handheld. But no Duck King, Tung Fu Ru or Blue Mary. These are the characters you would expect to find in a dedicated Fatal Fury game. In any case, the actual gameplay is very good, as you would expect. I would go as far as saying I like it slightly better than either of the KOF games. We have the power gauge from the arcade games here that allow you to pull off a bunch of really cool super moves. It's a good basic fighting game that gets lost in the shuffle a bit. There's not a lot here to separate it from the other titles in the Pocket Fighting series. SNK's classic arcade run and gun series finally makes its way onto the handheld with Metal Slug First Mission. Yeah, they're already planning sequels, it seems. And now that I think about it, maybe there was supposed to be a Fatal Fury Second Contact at some point. Anyway, this is definitely one of the flagship titles that makes this handheld a joy to play. It's not a straight adaptation of any existing Metal Slug game, but rather an original entry that puts its own spin on the formula, one that's better suited to a handheld. You play as Marco Rossi, who for some reason goes unnamed in this game. Actually, they kind of act like this is a completely different dude who just so happens to look identical. Play a character? Fuck that shit! Marco Rossi! Your journey through the game always ends in the same place, but how you get there can vary wildly depending on how you finish certain missions, mainly in the vehicle sections. Losing the tank will often lead to being thrown into a POW camp that you have to break out of with only a knife. It's a very cool cinematic moment. Getting shot down in the plane, on the other hand, will lead to these sections where you have to land safely using the parachute. Open it too soon, you'll be a sitting duck for missiles, open it too late, you'll go splat. It's always better to be late than early though. The timer on screen makes it seem like you should press the button when it's as close to 0 as possible, but this really isn't the case. If you're so much as a tenth of a second under the timer, it's death, whereas you can still land safely if you open the chute a full second late. I only know this because I timed it in my video editor. It's not very intuitive at all. Anyway, these different routes add a lot of replayability to the game, as well as all the hidden prisoners scattered about missions. They're not quite as linear as the arcade games either, with plenty of secret rooms and pathways. The jungle mission actually loops until you find the correct path to the end. The city mission has all of these back routes and secret rooms that makes it feel a bit Metroidvania-esque. It can be a tad confusing and throw off the pacing a bit, but it's interesting seeing Metal Slug with console design sensibilities. There's even a new game plus that allows you to carry over your rank, which increases your maximum amount of health. I'm a much bigger fan of this system than the one-hit deaths from the arcade game. It gives it a breezier, more laid-back difficulty. You can only start the game with a total of 9 continues, but as long as you save and end the game rather than continuing, you can retry from the same save point as many times as you like. So the continues function more like ink ribbons in Resident Evil, provided you use them in the way I just described. As for the gameplay, it's pretty good, but not without its fair share of flaws. You have to use the options button to switch your main weapon to grenades. The options button clearly wasn't designed to be pressed in the middle of the action. It's out of the way, it has a spongy feeling, and it just isn't as responsive as the face buttons. There are also some animations that can't be interrupted, which can lead to you taking damage that you would otherwise be able to avoid. The grenade throw will carry you forward ever so slightly, making them a high-risk weapon to resort to when there's not much breathing room. Lastly, there's some major slowdown if played on the original hardware, especially during the boss fights. It has nowhere near the graphical fidelity of the arcade games, but is no less a great entry in the series that's well worth playing. Beating the game once unlocks a female protagonist, who also doesn't have a name. She seems to be a completely original character though, if she's not just a prototype of Red Eye from the second game.
Neo Geo Pocket Color に本格野球ゲームがやってきた。あのチームが、あの選手が全て実名で登場。グラウンドの熱狂と興奮が君のものに。Neo Poke Pro Yakyu.
Neo Poke Pro Yakyu is the second baseball game to hit the system. It's a pretty big graphical leap over the launch title Baseball Stars. Look at those big, detailed players. It's almost hard to believe that both games are on the same handheld. This one was only released in Japan, if you couldn't tell from the title, and unlike Baseball Stars, it actually has real teams, like the Hanshin Tigers. I mentioned that one specifically because of this sweet Hanshin Tigers Neo Geo Pocket they released at the time. This game has a lot more going on in terms of content, such as the option of making custom players and teams. The gameplay is very similar to Baseball Stars, but it does have some notable differences. You now control all of your fielders at the same time, meaning that they move in sync like they're part of a hive mind. This one expects you to pick up the ball after you've bungled it. It was a bit harder for me to play because of the language barrier, and the difficulty in general seems a lot higher. The CPU hits home runs a lot more often than in Baseball Stars, where they rarely if ever do it. Somehow, the fielding is even more fiddly and imprecise, making it once again the worst part of the gameplay. But at least we can now save the game mid-inning, making it far more portable friendly. I also like the references to past ADK games, like this really cool Mudman field. Apparently there's an unlockable World Heroes team from playing 60 Pennant games. Overall, it's probably worth a bunt. Magical Drop Pocket is a handheld conversion of the classic arcade puzzle game Magical Drop, specifically the excellent Magical Drop 3. The objective is to match a row of 3 balloons and send junk at your opponent to make them overflow before they can do the same to you. The arcade and console renditions have your opponent on the right side of the screen, but Pocket simplifies this to a bar that fills up to represent how close they are to losing. It isn't too bad of a compromise, but it does mean you have to take the game's word for it when they manage to pull off a miraculous recovery from the brink of defeat. The more chains you're able to string together, the more balloons your opponent will have to deal with. There's a grace period while balloons are being cleared where you're able to keep the chain going. It's here where your twitch reflexes and moment-to-moment strategy can pay off beautifully to create these satisfying screen clears. There's one less column here than in the arcade version, and there's no adventure mode. However, it does have a bit more going on with its story. There's a lot of funny exchanges between the characters before and after matches, and they're made even more amusing by the somewhat wonky translation. Every character has their own story and ending, and there's 11 of them in total, including the 3 boss characters that you can unlock by beating it on hard and above. There's definitely a lot of replay value here. There's 5 difficulty levels. Be warned, anything below normal will lock you out of seeing the ending. Normal itself is a breeze for any experienced Magical Drop player. For them, we have Super Hard mode, which is absolutely brutal. Pretty much any challenge in Magical Drop is beatable through sheer persistence though. They have to win every single time, we only have to get lucky once. And lastly, we have the standard survival mode. More than one magazine from the time compared this game unfavourably to Puzzle Bobble. This was actually a common thing at the time, even for the main arcade entries in the series. Okay, it's time to set the record straight. All of these magazines are wrong, and Magical Drop is way better than Puzzle Bobble and always has been. But this is especially true about the Neo Geo Pocket versions of both games. Magical Drop Pocket couldn't be any better on that front. Colours are clear and vibrant. There's never any confusion about what's happening on screen, which is more than I can say for Puzzle Bobble Mini. The Game Boy Color would get its own Magical Drop in 2000, but it's a lazily thrown together mess that doesn't come anywhere close to Pocket's brilliance. It doesn't even have a story mode, only survival, and its graphics are garish. I played this one just out of curiosity. It was so bad it never even received a Japanese release. Overall, this is a game that's already pretty tactile and satisfying to play even on an emulator. Paired with a clicky stick, it might be one of the best puzzle games ever made. It's definitely up there as one of my favourite games on the handheld. Neo Turf Masters, or Big Tournament Golf as it's known in Japan, is a port of SNK's popular arcade game. It's considered by many to be a golfing classic with some very impressive smooth animations. The handheld version keeps most of the content but scales back on both the sounds and visuals. That's not to say it's a bad version of the game though. It is very functional and retains the essence of the game, just without a lot of its style. Which is a shame because when you take the style out of Neo Turf Masters, what you're left with is golf, and golf is boring. Nope, I'm not even going to follow that up with "in my opinion" like you want me to. In the single player, there are 3 main modes. Stroke Play, a simple exhibition mode. Handicap, which is a sort of dynamic difficulty exhibition mode. And finally, the main meat of the game, the Triple Crown. This is a course that has you playing the Japan, United States and Germany courses back to back to become the best in the world. There's also a collection of clubs that you can earn through the 2-player mode. Every mode has you in it for the long haul. You have to play a full 18 holes. You're able to save your progress between every stroke, but this is a less than ideal suspended save. The way these functioned on the Neo Geo Pocket meant that you would lose your progress if the cartridge is ejected or the batteries are removed. On a flash cart, they don't work at all. In any case, it's better to just play through the grueling 18 holes just so you can get to an actual save. As for the gameplay, what is there to say really? It's simple pick up and play golf that functions exactly as it should. Now watch this drive. Shanghai Mini is a game that took me by surprise a bit. It's Mahjong Solitaire, as its title suggests, but it has this interesting story mode that's clearly modelled after the most famous unfinished film of all time, Bruce Lee's Game of Death.
You know, baby.
You rise through the tower, challenging tougher and tougher opponents to Shanghai, which is a one-player game, by the way. Of all the games to give this kind of story to, they chose the least confrontational one. Anyway, I didn't get that far through the story mode because it's incredibly difficult. There's a time limit, and you're not allowed to shuffle the tiles if you make the game unwinnable for yourself. It's just game over. It doesn't help that I'm not good at Shanghai and not familiar enough with the tiles to clear them in a timely fashion. That's how this game works, by the way. You match tiles with ones of the same type. You can't pull out a tile if it's blocked in by another one. Some can be matched with ones of a different design though. I don't quite understand how the game can be made unwinnable if these stages are specifically designed to be beatable. There's another mode though that has no time limit and allows you to shuffle the tiles. I suppose this can be considered a practice mode of sorts, or just a nice portable time waster. Whatever you do, avoid the Robert Klaus version of this game, it's wildly offensive. Dive Alert is an original title for the handheld developed by the illustrious Saknov, the creators of Koudelka and Shadow Hearts. If you're a fan of that series, there's some notable names that also worked on this, such as the character designer Miyako Kato. It's an RPG that has you playing as a naive young submarine pilot in a post-apocalyptic Earth where the remaining population has been driven into the sea. It's a cool subgenre of Japanese fiction inspired by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that was somewhat popular around this time. Its setting and elements of its plot are similar to the PS2 game Sub-Rebellion, which I also reviewed a bit ago. This one has much more emphasis on the actual story though, with extremely long cutscenes that explain everything in agonizing detail. Even the opening crawl is reiterated after the first mission for some reason, like they didn't trust you to actually read the entire thing. This is a problem compounded by not being able to skip any cutscenes until New Game Plus. There are no save points during missions either, so if you die, you have to watch them all again. This is torture during the incredibly difficult final mission that has like 20 minutes of cutscenes to mash A through. God help you if your Neo Geo Pocket batteries run out. Dive Alert is an ambitious game constrained by the hardware it was made for. It wants to tell this epic story, but only has a mere 6 missions to do so. I can very easily see this exact story being told over the course of a 20 to 30 hour JRPG. To its credit though, its theme of future generations inheriting the mistakes of the past is well realised through the protagonist's journey. The final confrontation between the rebels and the CDH may be abrupt, but their character development is not. There's also just enough time for you to form a small bond with your navigator character, the appearance of which you get to choose at the start of the game. This is a very clever piece of gameplay and story integration, as the navigator is deliberately trying to appeal to you to gain your trust. Kind of like Pokemon, this game was released in 2 editions, Matt's version and Becky's version. The most significant difference, as you've likely already gathered, is the sex of the main character. There's exclusive content in both versions that you're meant to get by linking to a friend with the other version. Good luck with that. They each have their own set of navigators and subs. The protagonist makes a cameo at the end of the other's game. Other than this though, the story and missions are identical in both. It's a submarine sim that allows a high degree of customizability. The weight limitations of your hull creates a lot of interesting decisions on how you go about equipping it. Everything has weight, including weapons. If you splurge too much on some of the heavier parts in the shop, you may not have enough space left for armaments. There's a careful balance that needs to be maintained. The engine determines your speed on the surface, while the motor determines your speed underwater. You also have to worry about fuel, motor battery and air tanks. It's a good idea to bring an air tank and a battery that has the same capacity since they both bottleneck each other. The end game is more underwater centric, so I had to downgrade my surface engine to make more space for air. This aspect of the game is extremely absorbing. It can almost make you forget that the gameplay itself is not very good. It's tedious and plodding, and by far the worst part of the experience. Visually, it's not very exciting, and it moves at a glacial pace, especially early on before you upgrade your engine and motor. To be fair, the slow clunkiness is meant to simulate real submarine warfare. They're not exactly agile vessels. Even if you forgive this aspect though, there's still plenty of other flaws that are hard to ignore. It's held back by the lack of buttons. The options button is only used for sonar, which means you can't even pause the game. Diving and surfacing and switching weapons is done through a menu that doesn't pause the game either. It's incredibly fiddly and hard to get used to. You can only fire off 2 torpedoes at once, which means you have nothing to do while you're waiting for them to either detonate or disappear off screen. Enemies will also randomly change their depth to avoid your torpedoes, and you have no way of knowing when this will happen. I find a good strategy is to get right up in their face before firing. Sea mines and depth charges are also reliable since they explode immediately if an enemy is above or below respectively. These strategies don't work in the final mission however, where guided torpedoes and surface missiles are king. This final mission I keep mentioning encapsulates both the best and worst parts of the game design. It's tense and exciting, like watching Das Boot, yet asks the player to invest far too much of themselves into its shoddy gameplay. This is something that's also reflected in the post-game content. The submarine hulls gain experience points and level up, which increases their defense, hit points and weight limitations. Weirdly, the experience points for each level is multiplied by 10 every time, so it goes 1000 XP, 10,000, 100,000 and presumably ends at 1,000,000. Level 3 is the highest you're realistically going to see in a single playthrough. I was grinding the end missions for hours and hours and only managed to make it halfway to level 4. I can only imagine the time sink required to get the 5th and final sub at 1,000,000 points. I actually haven't been able to find anything about this online. If anyone has ever done it, they haven't bothered to document it. I couldn't find any videos or screenshots of what this even looks like. It's mysteries like these that make this game appealing to me despite its many flaws. There's a mecha in the opening called Machi-O that looks exactly like Giant Robo. It looks pretty important, but it doesn't seem to appear in the game itself. Is this cut content, or is it in there as a secret boss waiting to be discovered? It sort of feels deliberate in a way. This game's as vast and mysterious as the ocean itself. Third-party developers are few and far between with this handheld. Many of its games, even the Sonic title, was made by SNK themselves or one of their subsidiaries. Pac-Man was the only contribution Namco ever made to the NGP library. Wow guys, really taking a big risk with a straight port of the original arcade Pac-Man. It's a pretty good one though. There are 2 modes. Full screen, which shows the entire maze just like in the original, and scroll, where you get this zoomed in view that follows you. The advantage of this mode is that you get much larger, crisp sprites that pop out more on the NGP's small screen. This comes at the price of obscuring parts of the maze though, making it harder to find any dots you might have missed. The clicky stick wasn't ideal for this game since its diagonal inputs go completely unused, and can actually be more of a liability in the heat of the action. This is why copies of the game came with something called the cross ring, which limited the clicky stick to only 4 directional inputs. I got my copy used though, so it unfortunately didn't come with one. But at least we still have the sticker that alludes to its existence. This is most likely the only time I'm ever going to talk about Pac-Man, so I may as well get this off my chest. I'm not really a fan, and I tend to get bored of it rather quickly. I find it very frustrating, but then again it is an old arcade game. They're all kind of like that. No, I didn't make it to the kill screen. Puyo Pop is a port of Puyo Puyo 2, the extremely successful second entry in the Puyo series that could be found on basically every platform around this time, including handhelds. This was the first release outside of Japan to use the actual Puyo name and characters instead of turning it into something else, like Kirby or Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. It's an okay rendition. The first thing you'll want to do is go straight into the options and turn off the voices. Not because Al's voice is annoying, although it does admittedly get grating after a while. No, it's mostly because having voices during gameplay also disables the music. Because of technical limitations, the handheld was unable to play both at the same time, and I imagine they didn't want to have the music constantly being interrupted by the voices. Also, as a side note, the WonderSwan port from around the same time doesn't have this issue. It's nice that they were able to include the voices since they were in the original. I have to question why they even bothered. Playing this game with no music is a miserable experience. It changes its cutesy tone into something lifeless and dismal. The music, while better than nothing, isn't particularly stellar, and neither are the graphics outside of the opening animation. I'd say it's one of the uglier titles in the library, especially when you put it up against SNK's own Puzzle Link series. As for the gameplay, well, it's Puyo Puyo. You face off against opponents in a lengthy story mode by popping Puyos of the same colour. I've never been a fan. My natural urge is to remove any Puyos that I see immediately, but the game wants you to plan ahead and set up chain reactions to overwhelm your opponents with junk. They can do the same to you though, so all of your plans can get ruined very easily. When the pressure's on, I tend to fall back into my short-sighted habits. It's like the game wants me to be someone I'm not. I'm sorry, Puyo Puyo, it's not you, it's me.
Samurai Spirits 待望の移植決定。覇王丸が、右京が、ナコルルがネオジオポケットカラーで暴れまくる。ネオポケカラーサムライスピリッツ2仮面数。
Samurai Showdown 2 feels like a huge upgrade over the first in pretty much every respect. The gameplay is a lot smoother and more refined, and the addition of the card collection now gives you a reason to finish the game with all of the characters, of which there are many. Similar to KOF R1, some characters have been traded out for new ones. We lose Shizumaru Hisame, Amakusa and Zankaro, but gain Charlotte, Morozumi and Azura. Once again, the story is borrowed from another game. This time we get the episodic narrative of Samurai Showdown 64. As I mentioned, there's the inclusion of character-specific trading cards that you get every time you beat the story mode with that character. All of these have really nice artwork. They can be traded via the link cable, but their main purpose is to buff your characters in the story and survival modes. Some of these give you access to new super moves. This feels like a better implemented version of what they were trying for with Making Mode in KOF R2. Visually, the sequel is a bit flashier with these cool battle cut-ins and much more detailed backgrounds, par for the course for many of the later titles in the Pocket's library. It's a really good entry that does a much better job of translating the style and gameplay of Samurai Showdown to the handheld. It only takes a single glance at its awesome cover art to know that Dark Arms Beastbuster 1999 is going to be an absolute banger. It's a game by Noise Factory that might have some relation to SNK's 80s arcade rail shooter Beastbusters, maybe. They don't have much in common besides the title and zombies with guns though. Dark Arms is a different beast entirely that feels like Castlevania if it was played from a top-down perspective. You play as the Beastbuster, a man who ventures into what's called the Dark World seeking demonic weapons. He enters into a contract with Kaso the Shooting Master, this Grim Reaper looking guy who will help you create new Dark Arms and evolve them into more powerful forms. This is where the RPG elements come in. You don't level up your character, but instead your weapons. You start with a gun called the Catcher, which can capture the soul of any monster you kill it with. These souls can then be used to add experience points to your weapons and infuse them with elemental attributes. Once a weapon has enough experience, it can be evolved into a stronger form. The handgun can be evolved into either a submachine gun or a sub-shotgun. Yeah, a sub-shotgun. You'll have to commit to what kind of weapon you want it to be, and then follow that evolution tree to its logical conclusion. Weapons also have a secondary experience pool that fills up simply by killing enemies, and this one functions like how you'd expect. It just levels its attack power incrementally. Getting a new evolution after farming for monster souls is one of the most satisfying elements of the gameplay. At least I think so. Your mileage may vary depending on how strong of a stomach you have for grinding the same enemies over and over again. The gameplay here is very nice. In addition to the catcher, you have 3 weapon slots that you can fill with whatever you want. It's a good idea to have a nice, well-rounded loadout with both long-range and melee weapons. Ammo is represented by the power bar in the bottom left. This charges over time, even when not equipped, so you're encouraged to cycle through your weapons often. I wish this part was ever so slightly smoother though. Your character stops in place for a moment whenever you switch. It's a painful break in the flow that really shouldn't exist. The sprite work is very nice, and there's a lot of unique enemies that only appear in certain areas. The world of Dark Arms is my favourite part. It's moody and features some truly impressive scenery for the Neo Geo Pocket, like this looming angel headstone in the graveyard. Unfortunately, it's also rather small with only 5 main areas. You're able to visit these either at night time or during the day to see different NPCs and enemies. The last act of the game has you going back through these areas to collect all 9 pieces of Raison's body. It's clearly a way to pad out its length since there isn't a whole lot of new content here besides a single new boss. At the end, you get an incredibly brief new dungeon and that's it. It's a very abrupt and unsatisfying climax. The plot seems interesting, but it's a badly translated, incomprehensible mess that leaves you utterly bewildered about what's going on and what you're supposed to be doing. I made a sincere effort to understand the story, but just couldn't make heads or tails of anything. There's this girl named Joyce who says the same thing that happened to the Beast Buster happened to her 15 years ago. I assume this means she's the one who entered into a contract with Kaso to kill a demon and then became trapped there. But this demon, called Eternal's Coffin according to Raison, seems to have been ripped from her body, so was it her? Also, if this NPC is to be believed, Joyce is a princess, if she is indeed the woman from the mansion. How can she be a princess if she came from the human world 15 years ago? Why is Joyce in possession of the Beastbuster's memories? And how did he lose his memories in the first place? I just don't know, that's the problem. It doesn't tell you anything outright and leaves you to connect the dots on your own. What's even going on in this world? They make it sound like every time an enemy is killed here, a person in the real world vanishes. What's the deal with that? Are their souls connected? Am I actually playing as a mass-murdering psychopath right now? This does track considering his main ambition seems to be power, but this isn't reflected in the story at all. He helps Joyce towards the end and even promises to visit her, so I don't know what his deal is. Is it because he lost his memories? Did losing his memories make him easy to manipulate by Kaso? Why do contracts bring disaster to the Dark Realm? Why does Kaso want to bring souls to the Dark Realm? Why does Joyce mention that the world is at stake? I haven't the slightest clue. At the very least, the basic steps for completing the game are laid out plainly enough most of the time. Go here and do this, but that's it. It doesn't matter though. The most important part of this game are the vibes, and they are indeed on point. The main story is rather short, but there is a post-game dungeon that has you descending deeper into Kaso's basement. It's filled with bosses and enemies you already fought in the main game, and every now and then you can choose to leave and save your progress, or keep going. It's really cool, but after you get to the bottom, there isn't any reason to continue playing other than to keep leveling up your weapons. It has flaws, but Dark Arms is a great addition to the library. Are you a train taku? Ever wanted to LARP as a train conductor while riding a train? Well, now you can with the portable version of Taito's Densha de Go 2, one of the free games on the handheld that uses the beefy 4MB cartridge. It definitely needed it because getting Densha de Go on a handheld must not have been easy. This was an arcade game that sought to accurately recreate various Japanese train routes with impressive 3D graphics. This would have been impossible to achieve on a handheld from the 90s, so they went with pseudo 3D rendered with 2D sprites, similar to many of Sega's earlier superscaler games. The result is one of the best looking Neo Geo Pocket games. The movement is silky smooth and fluid. It is lacking in environmental details though. You're often travelling through what appears to be a nuclear wasteland. Nevertheless, it's the best you could possibly do on a handheld at the time. There are two modes to choose from. Arcade mode is what you want for a quick game on the go, while the original mode adds more random elements for the sake of realism, like changing passenger load and the weather conditions. It's a simulation of a pretty mundane occupation. You must come to a stop at each station in time while following the speed limits and not giving everyone whiplash by using the emergency brakes. It's a very rule-oriented game. Any infractions will deduct time from your stock of excess time, which you're usually given 30 seconds of. It's sort of like a health bar, your lifeline. If you make too many mistakes and it hits 0, it's game over. Actually coming to a stop without completely overshooting the stations takes some serious practice. No one ever said that being a train conductor was an easy job. These games are for a hardcore audience that probably doesn't exist outside of Japan. It's a good game, but a hard one to recommend to non-Japanese speakers. The menus are simple enough, but all the stops are written in Japanese. The job is already stressful enough, you add a language barrier on top of that, it's an absolute nightmare. Pocket Love If is the first of 3 visual novels released on the handheld by Kid. Kindle Imagine Develop. This one is a guiding game of sorts to the 2 Pocket Love games that were released on the original Game Boy. It's a dating sim in a similar vein to Tokimeki Memorial that has you planning out your schedule as you try to win the heart of one of its 6 main heroines. This would ordinarily be right up my alley, but unfortunately all of these types of games on the system are untranslated, so we can't look at it beyond the surface level. If you've ever tried to play one of these, you know how hard it is not accidentally making all of the girls hate you with some careless decisions. Just like in real life, am I right? Anyway, this entry takes place a year before the events of the first game and features a couple new heroines. This is why I said it's a guiding game. It's unclear if it exists in the same universe as the other 2 entries. Dressing for the occasion seems to be a central mechanic of this one. These girls don't take kindly to someone who neglects their drip. He makes use of the internal clock for certain hidden events. If you like these kinds of micromanagey gal games, well, this is the only one on here. And by all accounts, it's a decent entry in the Pocket Love series.
Card Fighters!
What a game! Nowadays, the novelty of seeing SNK and Capcom characters in the same game has probably worn off. But it's important to remember that it all started here, in a card game on the Neo Geo Pocket. It was even released as 2 separate versions, encouraging gamers to pick a side. It's the same game either way, but there are some significant differences. They both have a different set of male and female protagonists. No matter which you choose, the male protagonist from the other version will be your main rival in the story, and the others appear as side characters that you can encounter and challenge to a card duel. Each version has its own starter deck filled with cards from their respective brand. If you couldn't tell from this video, I lean more towards SNK. And clearly, so did SNK themselves since they have the superior starter deck. You get a Terry Bogard with 1000 BP, a heavy hitter that you'll keep in your deck for the entirety of the game. Capcom, on the other hand, only gets a decent Ken Masters with 700 BP and less SP. To be fair though, you do also get a Sakura card, which has a really good passive ability. Her BP is doubled if she's played when you're below 1000 hit points. Still, I find the early game a bit easier on the SNK side. While most cards can be earned in either version, there are some exclusive ones that you can only get by trading with another person. Good luck with that. Yeah, it's the same deal as Dive Alert, or rather, Pokemon. Gotta catch them all and all that. I should probably mention that if you're playing the modern port of the game, it actually lets you trade cards between versions. It's standalone on the Switch, but on PC it's part of the Neo Geo Pocket Color Selection Volume 2. Back in my day, we used to have deck-building RPGs that weren't roguelikes. Card Fighters Clash takes place in the busy arcades of Osaka, Japan, A fantastic setting bursting at the seams with character and references to past SNK and Capcom games. You must visit each location and challenge the hosts there so that you may rise through the ranks of the SC tournament and eventually compete to become champ. The card game itself is great and we'll get to it, but it's the locations that make this game so special to me. Osaka is the hometown of both SNK and Capcom. It taps into the arcade scene of the area in a very authentic and palpable way, while also adding a touch of whimsy that almost makes it feel like a fantasy setting. There's a deep reverence for this card game like it's more than just a game. It's a way of life, man. It's hard not getting drawn into it. I hadn't even played any card games before this, but 20 hours later I was recounting my greatest battles to other people, like an ancient Greek rhapsodist. Anyway, the setting is really fun and has a lot of interesting personalities hanging around. You can even find a recreation of the Resident Evil mansion and challenge Shinji Mikami himself to a card fight. It's wonderful stuff. Every time you defeat an opponent, they give you a few random cards. You don't have to do the same if you lose though, because it's actually a fun game. You can trade for new cards at some of the shops, provided you're able to part with a few of the same level of rarity. You can also dump a bunch of your unused ones into a machine to get a single in return. It could be another useless card, it could be an overpowered S-tier card, or anything in between. Your game is saved each time you do this to prevent save scumming. Honestly, it's one of my favourite parts of the game. I now understand the thrill of opening up a pack of Pokemon cards to find a Mewtwo or whatever. You're allowed 50 cards in one deck. The attack cards are your main offense and defense. Both their hit points and attack power are rolled into one number, called their battle points or BP. This helps to keep things nice and simple, but it also has really interesting gameplay implications. A weakened card won't be able to dish out much damage and may become a liability, preventing you from bringing in new better cards to replace them. You can only have 3 in the ring at once. An attacking card may be defended against by another card. Otherwise it goes straight to the player's HP. There will be times when it's better to tank damage rather than letting your opponent weaken your potential offense. There's also the strategy of starving your opponent of SP by allowing them to keep hold of their weakened cards. Most cards give you SP when you bring them into the ring. Often cards that have a lot of SP don't have much BP and vice versa. SP is needed for united attacks, which allows you to attack with 2 or more cards at once. Ordinarily, defending against an attack will prevent it from going straight to your HP, but a united attack will, using any leftover BP they have. Not all of the cards are balanced. There are some that are just all around better than others, and these tend to be the rarer ones that you start finding in the late game. A single one of these heavy hitters can change the tide of battle. My favourite is the Akuma card that gives you a free KO when placed in the ring. The endgame tends to veer towards these overpowered cards with super useful passives and abilities. It makes it feel more like a JRPG where there's an objective increase in power. You're not just refining your strategies, you're also improving your raw damage output. This allows the game to create an interesting single player that is always evolving. I can very easily see things being more balanced for the sake of multiplayer, but this game throws that to the wind and just lets you have fun. That's not to say there isn't depth, because there certainly is. The backup mechanic adds an extra layer of strategy to how you build your deck. Using a card to back up another gives them additional BP and still allows you to play another card that turn. There's also action cards, which are used to do all kinds of things provided you have enough SP to play them. It's a game you can easily spend hours upon hours obsessing over, and I definitely have. It's just an all-around great game and one of the best the handheld has to offer. The progression from some rando hanging out in a card shop to champion is really satisfying. The amount of awesome artwork on these cards is truly astounding. The way the characters extend beyond the borders of them is also a very nice touch. Even the music is great. This handheld has always had a bad reputation for its beeps and boops. Not many games are able to make good use of its sound chip, but Card Fighters Clash is filled with nothing but bangers. Not only that, but there's a good variety of them with many different battle themes. They even managed to make a pretty good rendition of the Spencer Mansion music in here. I've gushed about this one for long enough, so let's move on, shall we? Puzzle Link 2 is basically just a slightly expanded version of the first game. It has a touch more story this time around, by which I mean it actually tells you the names of the characters from the first game and even introduces a few new ones. The main card mode works a little differently now and doesn't have much linear progression outside of the final stage you unlock. They're introduced as different challenge areas for you to collect new cards, with a different theme and boss character for you to defeat. This is not something that's represented in the gameplay though, and mainly just exists to make things seem less abstract. The cards in general get a lot more focus this time around and are now more than just collectibles. They can be used to play a card battle game against a CPU or another player via the link cable. Winner gets to keep the other's card. Card fighters clash, this is not. I only messed with it for a bit because it isn't too interesting. It's a surface level time waster at best, and certainly isn't significant enough to be one of the main draws of this game. No, that would be the regular Puzzle Link gameplay, which remains as fun and addictive as ever. There's a new survival mode called Endless. Its inclusion makes so much sense, I'm surprised by its omission the first time around. A small improvement to the presentation is that you can now see Ace on the left side of the screen, and he starts looking worried if things aren't going your way. This is mostly considered the superior of the two Puzzle Links, and I would agree for the most part. It's missing two things from the first game though: the difficulty select and that earworm that plays whenever you collect a card. Pachinko Hiso Guide Pocket Parlor is a recreation of Sankyo's CR Fever Casino RX Pachinko machine. What a mouthful. Maybe that means something to you, it means absolutely nothing to me. Or at least it didn't until I wrote this section. You use a stick to control the force the balls are shot out with. There's an entire menu dedicated to explaining terminology and how to play, but really, what is there to explain with Pachinko anyway? You just sit there and mindlessly watch ball after ball tumble down the drum. It's almost hypnotic, in real life anyway. In this game it all happens in silence except for the occasional jingle when you activate the slot machine. I always thought that half the appeal of Pachinko was the sound of the balls bouncing off of things and falling down the gutters. That's what the real machine does. And yeah, I did go out of my way to find a video of this thing just to make this comparison. Maybe the Pocket just wasn't able to replicate the sounds well enough, who knows. In any case, it's the only Pachinko game on the handheld, so I guess it fills that particular niche. The game that set us on this journey in the first place. It's Sonic the Hedgehog Pocket Adventure, a masterpiece according to IGN, and a very special release in general. It was the second Sonic game to be on non-Sega hardware for a start, with the first being the rather infamously terrible Sonic Jam for the Tiger Gamecom. How the fuck do I own this? My oldest brother just brought one of these home one day and gave it to me, the absolute mad bastard. This thing barely even counts though, since it feels like a glorified tech demo that shouldn't have ever been released. It doesn't even have the entirety of the games that it purports to have. Pocket Adventure is not only a complete package, but the best handheld Sonic game that had been released at that point. The Game Gear titles ranged from mediocre to outright terrible, and certainly weren't able to capture the magic of the real Mega Drive games, which I personally consider some of the best 2D platformers ever made. Nowadays, Pocket Adventure is often dismissed as a sort of demake of Sonic 2. Indeed, there is an argument to be made. It does, after all, follow the same level themes and even has the same special stages. Neo South Island is Emerald Hill, Secret Plant is Chemical Plant, Cosmic Casino is Casino Night, and so on. The only truly original level theme is the final one, Gigantic Angel, and even that takes many design cues from Metropolis Zone. However, this ignores the fact that the layouts for these returning levels are mostly original. You can still see some of the same gimmicks and design philosophy to them, but they're pretty different. And you throw in the fact that it has a completely different set of boss fights for the most part. Some of these are lifted from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, while others are completely original. Something else from 3 and Knuckles is the music. Yeah, it's Sonic 2 levels with the music from 3 and Knuckles. SNK correctly came to the conclusion that Chrome Gadget was too good of a song to be exclusive to the 2-player mode. Its story is also a bizarre mix of Sonic 2 and 3. Speaking of which, this might be the funniest level transition in the entire series. It makes for a radically different experience that still feels fresh even if you have played Sonic 2. But if Pocket Adventure was just a basic port of Sonic 2, that still would have been really impressive on a handheld from '99. I mean, we're kind of losing perspective a bit if just being Sonic 2 isn't good enough. Sonic 2 kicks ass. And SNK absolutely nailed the classic 2D Sonic gameplay and physics in a way that even Sega was unable to recreate after countless attempts. You had to bring in Christian Whitehead to figure that one out. I personally like that this is on the easier side too. You always have access to the last level you played, and the levels themselves aren't even very long, so getting a game over doesn't set you back very far. I appreciated that I was actually able to beat this as a kid. Although it was only much later, while making my last video on this game, that I was able to get all the Chaos Emeralds and see the true final boss. Another inclusion that sets it apart from Sonic 2. There's a lot of fun extras you don't usually get in these games too, like the time trials and puzzle pieces. These can be put together in the puzzle room to make cool artwork. I've since collected all the puzzle pieces in the entire game, on my original cartridge anyway. It's pretty fun, I recommend doing it. It kinda makes the game feel like Sonic CD a bit. This game also has 2-player via the link cable where the second player gets to control Tails. Unbelievable! I had no idea as a kid. This is perhaps my only grievance with SNK. As a little brother, I was of course a huge Tails fan. Why couldn't he be playable in the normal single player? As I've constantly been alluding to throughout this 2-parter, it isn't easy accessing the link cable functions in these games. First, you have to find someone else who owns a Neo Geo Pocket Color. Already an impossible task. I never met anyone who had one, even back when they were new. But let's assume I did. They would also need to own another copy of the same game. Our chances have gone down yet again, but not by much, at least with Sonic anyway. But we're not done though, because in order for me to play with that person, one of us would need to own a link cable. I never owned one. I never even saw one. Statistically, I probably had better odds of winning the lottery than playing as Tails in Pocket Adventure is what I'm trying to convey. Nowadays, you can find a ROM hack called Pocket Winter that makes both Tails and Knuckles playable in the base game. It even works on original hardware using a flashcard. It's a very nostalgic game to me. Sorayuke Hanafuda Dojo is a Hanafuda game, one of 2 for the Neo Geo Pocket. It's a card game that doesn't really translate that well to the handheld given the low resolution of the screen. It's all about pairing the cards in your hand to the ones on the table of the same suit. There's a lot more details on these cards compared to, say, playing cards or Mahjong tiles, so you better be familiar with them. Sometimes it takes a bit of imagination to figure out what they're supposed to be. The AI is not messing around either. They never let a mistake go unpunished. There's a tournament mode where you fight against 8 opponents, a standard versus mode for free play and 2-player, and a ranking mode. You can also change the rules, allowing you to play your own regional variant of Hanafuda if you wish. I had a lot of fun playing this against Koran in Sakura Wars. With their second game, Sakanoff would continue to be the handheld's sole provider of ambitious, story-heavy RPGs, this time to much greater success. Facile was the game helmed by Matsuzo Machida, the director of the first 2 Shadow Hearts games, and its character designs were once again done by Miyako Kato. Her work here is much more reminiscent of Shadow Hearts. There's a wide range of excellent designs that perfectly convey everything you need to know about its cast. The protagonist Sho is cocky and brash. This is immediately obvious on the name entry screen from his self-assured smirk and unkempt hair. Agnes seems to be just Jill Valentine though. I mean, if you're gonna copy a character design, it might as well be one of the best, right? Facile is far and away one of the best games on the handheld that pushes the hardware to its absolute limit. Its opening is something no other game even attempted. a rocking anime theme song with samples and actual vocals. It would be improper not to play the thing in its entirety for you.
If you wish to leave a record of your call, please take no less than the sound of the tone.
Oh sure, the sound quality is muffled like it's being played underwater, but still, it's a wonderful opening that sets the tone of the game perfectly. Camaraderie on the battlefield, hope even amidst the despair of war. Phone calls. Yeah, that part is a bit out of place, I must admit. On opposite day, that's the Call of Duty, baby. Facile takes place in a fictional Middle Eastern country called Ishtar during a civil war fought between its two princes. We follow the elite mercenary team Facile that is on the opposing side of Prince Erbil, a despotic ruler who committed regicide against the king to gain hegemony of the region. I would recommend reading the manual beforehand because there's a lot of characters in this story and the game doesn't do a great job of explaining. Now, before I go on, I want to say that I do like this game's plot. The crew of the Orchard are some of the most well-defined characters on the Neo Geo Pocket. It remains gripping throughout. However, its narrative does have one fatal flaw that simply cannot be ignored. It's a rip-off of Mobile Suit Gundam. I mean, no duh, right? Pretty much every real robot anime borrows elements from it here and there. But Facile takes it a little too far for my liking. The team is constantly being harried by Alan, an enemy commander who seems to have developed an obsession with besting Sho in combat. He's a Shah Aznable clone. The game is pretty blatant about it. He pilots a red mecha and goes by the name the Red Meteor. At the very least, he doesn't wear a mask. The similarities don't stop there though. His backstory is very similar, and he even has a sister on the opposing side of the conflict. In other words, his very own Sailor Mass. Spoilers for a 50-year-old anime, by the way, sorry about that. Later on, there's also an enemy team called the Jackals that resembles the Black Tri-Stars a bit, but this one isn't quite as egregious. It's actually my favourite story arc in the game. Their leader, Barbara, looks completely different in the manual for whatever reason. Maybe this was an early design they forgot to update. I prefer her actual in-game portrait. It just radiates smugness. Anyway, if you haven't seen the original Gundam, then all that stuff I was talking about doesn't matter a whole lot. Considering the hardware they were working with, Saknov did a great job of capturing the grounded, militaristic grit of a real robot anime. In battle, you cue commands for your robot and then watch them play out in real time. This method of control feels like a great way to convey the stiff unresponsiveness of this world's robots within a turn-based system. Every movement and action requires a program chip to function, and you can only equip so many. This leads to some interesting decisions. Do you forgo the ability to use items or reload your gun so you can maximize how many weapons you can fire? Or perhaps you sacrifice the ability to move backwards or turn in a certain direction. You probably want to keep the bare essentials at least. There are many program chips that do all sorts of things, like buffing your attack or evasion. You can upgrade the onboard computer to get more chip slots using money from missions. It's a game that's all about building and customizing your own robot. You can even change the colour and give it a name. The one I'm using here was carried over from New Game Plus using an old save file, so it's extremely powerful. I'm fairly certain it's a Muv-Luv reference. And there's a huge variety of weapons that you can equip for all different kinds of situations. The main thing that sets them apart is the attack radius. The sniper rifle can attack from far away, but only in a straight line. Since you can't guarantee that an enemy will remain in your sights, sometimes it's better to use something with a wider range, like the assault rifles. Missiles are the most versatile since they're the only weapon that can reach enemies behind objects. They also have the smallest supply of ammo, however. There's plenty of diversity to build your own mecha however you like and develop your own playstyle. I like to use the melee weapons since they're reliable and have a lot of ammo. Yeah, for some reason they have an ammo count, which I guess is meant to represent their durability. You have a backpack that holds all of your extra magazines and health kits. You can only carry so much, so this is another area you'll need to carefully consider. The missions can be incredibly long and difficult, but that's when this game's at its best. When you just barely manage to finish a mission on your last magazine and sliver of health. It isn't quite as hardcore as some other games in the genre though, since you are allowed to grind missions for money. It's reminiscent of Dive Alert, except the gameplay is a lot more fun and the best machines don't require hundreds of hours of grinding. Its story isn't nearly as rushed either, with a total of 12 missions that can take over 10 hours to beat. This game is often described as a handheld front mission, but it's not even really a strategy RPG. You only control the one character. You do have one other ally in battle, but you can't tell them what to do. They're only really good for taking a bit of the heat off of you. This is fine though. I appreciate the more simplified take on the genre. It has plenty of its own ideas and executes them in a very unique way. This isn't just a good Neo Geo Pocket game, it's a good game in general. What on earth is Party Mail? Of all the Japan-only releases in here, this one confounds me the most. It asks you a million questions when you first boot it up, like it's interrogating you. Why now, of all times, did you decide to play Party Mail? For this video, obviously, but even that reasoning eventually drifted from my mind as I played it with my mouth agape. You have 5 types of pets that deliver mail. They evolve and level up the more you play, and they can even comment on your personal data, which I think is what I was entering at the start there. That's the only information I managed to glean online. The actual gameplay consists of these pets entering your garden one after another. You can give them mail to deliver and then send them on their way by giving them some of your cards. You can also pet them or bonk them on the head. I think you have to do this with some of the uninvited guests that try to crash your party. Mail. I'm sorry, okay, I don't know what's going on. I keep trying to play this one, but it never makes any more sense. The gameplay just goes on forever. I'm not even sure if it's possible to fail and get a game over. I couldn't even find a scan of the manual online, so this might still be confusing even if I could read all the text. I think you send emails over the link cable or something. I just don't know. It's cute, that's about all I can say. SNK vs Capcom, the match of the millennium, is without a doubt the pinnacle of the pocket fighting series. It was the very first crossover fighting game between the two before Capcom's own Millennium Fight 2000 released the following year. Its 32 meg cartridge allowed it to have twice as much content as any other fighting game we've looked at so far. In addition to the usual SNK characters we're used to seeing, we have the Capcom side of the roster, which just consists of Street Fighter and Darkstalkers characters. Nothing too surprising there. It goes without saying then that this has the largest roster of any NGP fighter, with 26 playable characters in all. Everyone has a rival character from the opposing brand that will show up in their story and act as a foil. The tourney mode here is great and feels more alive than previous efforts with a lot of good fan service moments, like Bison and Geese teaming up to be the main villains. You can also play through it as a team, which gives you some extra interactions with your partner characters. The tourney mode alone is enough to keep you replaying for a while, but it's only one half of the package. There's also the Olympic mode, where you compete to win medals for a variety of events. There's your standard fighting game modes like Survival, but also 4 original minigames based on other Capcom and SNK series. One of them is a rhythm game, which I think I like better than the actual rhythm game on the handheld. The points you earn here can be used to unlock new moves for tourney mode. It's filled with a lot of character for a simple B mode, such as the managers that you're able to talk to. I like that Karen was included in some form, but it's a shame she isn't playable. As for the fighting, it's like a more refined and fluid version of R2's gameplay. You're able to choose from 3 different styles of meter as well. Oh wow, Nakaruru is actually fun to play as this time. It's one of the most critically acclaimed games on the handheld for a reason. It is arguably still the best handheld fighting game that's ever been put out. Hey, did you know that you could connect this game to the Dreamcast version of Millennium Fight 2000? That was a functionality that would start becoming more common around this time. Shigeru Mizuki was a prolific manga artist whose works often centered around yokai and Japanese folklore. He's probably best remembered for the iconic and enduring Gegege no Kitaro, which has had many anime adaptations since the 1960s. During the 90s though, he made the leap into computer games with some pretty interesting titles. Shigeru Mizuki's yokai photo album for the Neo Geo Pocket Color is, of course, the main one we're concerned with. The man himself even appears in the game as the mentor to our young hero, who comes into possession of a camera that can capture yokai. It may actually be a regular camera, I'm not entirely sure, since this one has no translation to speak of. It's all about exploring its huge map, looking for spirits to photograph, some of which only appear in certain places and under certain criteria. Because of this, I wasn't able to make it very far through the photo album. I jumped on a plane to a different island and was stuck there with no money to get back. You can make money by selling your yokai pictures to Kitaro. Yes, the Kitaro. He makes an appearance in this game alongside the Ratman, or Nezumi Otoko, whatever you want to call him. To get a good picture, you have to snap them when they're in the center of the viewfinder while it's green. The harder yokai play hard to get and move around in erratic patterns. You need to be careful because you only have so much film. You can buy more, but I do wonder what would happen if you run out of both money and film. You won't be able to sell any pictures to get more film, so would you just be soft-locked? I'm sure that's not the case. This game is, sadly, not very enjoyable if you can't read its text. The music is also horribly repetitive and annoying too. Neo 21 is yet another entry in Dyna's Pocket Casino series. This time the game is blackjack. If I must recommend one of these, it would be this one. There's just a little extra production value this time around that makes it stand out. There's this cool opening for a start, but there's also the addition of these voice samples.
20. Insurance? No blackjack.
It's a little on the dry side, unsurprisingly. It's trying to be all boring and realistic, true to the casino-going experience. I would have preferred them to spice things up a little with some kind of story mode, but unfortunately there's nothing of the sort. It's just blackjack, which is one of the more interesting games you can play in a casino. It's certainly more involving than the slot machines. Kiko Seiki Unitron is the second and final entry in the Unitron series, and unlike the first, was never released outside of Japan. There's an incomplete fan patch that translates some of the text into English, but the story remains untranslated outside of its ridiculously lengthy and epic opening text crawl, and even that gives up towards the end. This looks like it's going to be the most amazing Neo Geo Pocket RPG yet, but like the first game, not a whole lot happens until the end, when everything starts happening. This series just kinda has that structure for whatever reason. You're not able to play as a strange fantasy creature this time around, just a male or female human. However, there's a greater variety when it comes to your engineer, who takes on a more active role in this one. Both heroes get their own set of 5 to choose from, with the guy getting the obviously superior ones. I think whichever one you choose changes the element of your mecha, or at least its colour. Your engineer also provides you with backup during combat too. Aesthetically, this sequel is gorgeous, with a lot more detail in the sprites and environments. The art style has been changed to something more mature and visually striking. We went from these kind of lame chibi robots to full-on mecha that look straight out of Super Robot Wars. The enemies have had a similar makeover. They all look a lot meaner and more dangerous. The character designs were done by Yumitsuki Kotoyoshi, the artist behind the Saber Marionette J manga. As for the gameplay, it's now a bit more challenging, mainly because you can't become overpowered as easily. You will eventually become overpowered by the end game, but for the most part you'll have to put in slightly more thought into battles. Not that much more though. Elemental weaknesses now play a larger role, but can still be ignored entirely. With all of these improvements, it must be better than the first game, right? Not necessarily. It's a lot more uneven, particularly when it comes to the actual dungeon crawling. I've read online that the layouts of these are still semi-randomly generated, but I couldn't tell you to what degree. To me, they feel a lot more static compared to the first game, which makes them way less interesting and unpredictable to explore. You'd think this would make them less confusing to navigate, but you'd be wrong. They're way easy to get lost in thanks to the abundance of warp pads teleporting you all over the place. Sometimes they send you to a different dungeon entirely. It's a nightmare finding your way around, even with the quality of life features they added, like being able to start from a certain floor. I like how your EP no longer fills up after a battle. It makes it feel more like a traditional dungeon crawler. A change for the worse is definitely the more limited inventory system though. It felt like I was constantly throwing away items just to make enough room for stuff. Items no longer stack either, so it looks like an unorganized mess. There was a strange Tamagotchi-like creature added to the game. You can feed it materials to level it up, which will increase your Unitron stats. If you like the first one, you'll enjoy this too, provided you can read Japanese. I accidentally grinded to a high level before even figuring out how to progress past the early parts of the story. It's no longer something simple like finishing the Colosseum or reaching the end of a dungeon. You now need to get to a certain floor of a dungeon and speak to an NPC or something. There's no GameFAQs guide either, so you may have to brute force it. The only reason I was able to finish it was because of this sheep VTuber I found who played the entire thing on stream. Much appreciated. As I say, Kanji-O is a kanji teaching game to help people who already know how to speak Japanese read kanji better. I played this with a friend who has some Japanese knowledge, and neither of us did very well. The time limits are very strict. This is not beginner friendly at all. It's all relatively advanced stuff. If you don't speak Japanese anyway. Similes and all that jazz. Kanji is hard to learn at the best of times, and we are certainly not fluent enough to get the most out of this game. Regardless, even if you can speak fluent Japanese, the game still isn't that interesting. It is, by its very nature, a bland teaching tool, and the only interesting graphics are its little mascot teacher character that grades you on your answers at the end. There's also some sort of battle game that you can play in 2-player as well. Pocket Reversey is, well, Reversey, or Othello as it's also known as. It's one of those games that doesn't seem too interesting at first glance, but believe it or not, it's a highly sought after title. Mainly because it's one of the rarer Neo Geo Pocket games that was released in Europe. The amount of copies in circulation is thought to be in the double digits. Rarity aside though, it's also a really good reversey game with a lot more personality than its bland cover would suggest. It's one of the more visually interesting board game titles on here, with these really vivid character designs. You can face different opponents in free play mode or enter the tournament. The CPU can put up an incredibly difficult game for those looking for a challenge. I'm kind of crap though, so I never got that far. Embarrassingly, I lost to the 10-year-old girl who opens the tournament. It's pretty beginner friendly though, with some lessons on how to play with Dr. Reversey, and some fairly easy introduction games in the free play mode. You can even change the pieces to be slightly more interesting. This was made by Success, the developer behind the Cotton series. It seems like an unusual choice for them, but Pocket Reversey is no shovelware. It's a piece of high quality software, that much is obvious even if Reversey isn't your thing. SNK Gals Fighters is the craziest, most cracked out fighting game on the handheld, and it also happens to be my personal favourite. Sorry Match of the Millennium, you may have more characters and content, but you don't have the origami and drag. It centres around the mysterious Queen of Fighters tournament that only women are invited to. This limits the game's roster to only the fan favourite SNK heroines from various series. They were being very tongue-in-cheek with this one. The moves and animations are noticeably more silly and cartoonish, even when compared to the other Neo Geo Pocket fighting games. There's a mechanic where you run into a Looney Tunes dust cloud and have to button mash against your opponent. I like that finishing a match with a super makes their life flash before their eyes. It's so weird and extra. The story is also an absolute farce. Everyone is participating in the tournament to have their wishes granted, something that only Shiki seems to have put any serious thought into. This all leads to possibly the funniest final boss in SNK history with Miss X, who, as I already gave away, is Yurigami. Every character has different interactions with him at the end, and they're all absolute gold. My favourites are his flustered reactions to anyone wielding a blade like Nakaruru or Shiki. The gameplay feels like Match of the Millennium on speed. It's turbo mode nonsense that is as ridiculous as it is fun to play. As a casual fighter, I don't think it can be beaten in sheer enjoyment factor. If I'm going to pick up the NGP to play a fighting game, this is the one I'm most likely going to choose, as someone who doesn't take these games that seriously. What can I say, I'm easily won over by SNK waifus getting into shenanigans. There's items that you unlock that can have some influence over the battle, like changing the amount of meter someone starts with. Some of them don't do anything at all though. These, in addition to the secret characters, are your main reason to go through the story with everyone. There's no extra modes except for a simple training mode. It's a return to the more basic, bare-bones content of earlier releases, but more than makes up for it in likability. Cool Boarders Pocket is a portable entry in the popular snowboarding series on the PlayStation by UEP Systems. It's one of the more unassuming games in the library. It has a chibi art style that might lead you to assume it's more casual and laid back than its console counterpart, like many of SNK's first-party games. But you'd be dead wrong. This game has teeth. The difficulty is closer to something that would have been released on the NES than the Neo Geo Pocket. The mainline Cool Boarders games were fairly easy if your goal was to simply get to the bottom of the mountain. It was mainly about accomplishing it in style by pulling off tricks and improving your track times. In Pocket though, there are no tricks, and just finishing the course is a frustrating undertaking that requires a lot of trial and error memorization. The level design is some of the cruelest and most unfair on the handheld. It's not even trying to resemble a real snowboarding course. It's more a sadistic game designer's hellish idea of one. There are so many obstacles that are out to kill you in cartoonishly silly ways, and you have very little time to react to any of them. You have a health bar that can be replenished by, get this, going faster. It almost feels like a mechanic they threw in to pour salt in the wounds. The B button is used for sharp turns, while A lets you jump. You can hold it down for a higher jump, and then keep yourself airborne by continuously spinning the stick. This is easier said than done. The pitfalls are the worst because falling down them is a difficult mistake to recover from. The game is cruel enough to respawn you right in front of them, giving you very little time to build up any jumps. This essentially traps you in a loop of failure until a game over happens. The isometric perspective also doesn't help things. It makes it so that you're mostly controlling your character using diagonals, which doesn't feel comfortable on the clicky stick or any other controller for that matter. There's a bunch of unlockable stages, but I didn't get very far before throwing in the towel. The most fun I had was actually in the survival mode, where the unforgiving difficulty makes more sense. It feels at home here as a trollish arcade game you're meant to play for 5 minutes and then walk away. At any rate, it's an absolutely horrid game that I wouldn't recommend to even the most die-hard of Cool Boarders fanatics, let alone anyone casually browsing the NGP's game library. Bikuriman 2000 Viva Pocket Festival is a variety game that has you collecting stickers from its various attractions, many of which are slot machines. Nothing on this handheld is safe from gambling. To be fair though, there's a lot more going on than just the slots. There's a big hub area with loads of NPCs for you to speak to. There's most likely even a story in there if you can read the text. It's apparently based on the Bikuriman 2000 anime, which I tried to watch for some context but is also untranslated, and only seems to exist online as the lowest quality VHS rip you've ever seen. I don't know, I watched the entire first episode and didn't see anyone playing the slots. I think they were taking some liberties. Bikuriman itself though is based on a chocolate wafer snack that comes bundled with stickers. To me, this is like if they gave multiple 50-episode anime series and a game tie-in to the Freddo bar. The only true way to test the strength of the Great British Pound. Where are we at on that anyway? Jesus Christ! You play mini-games to get coins that you can use on the slot machines. From these, you can win special character stickers that you can trade using the link cable. There's also some Dreamcast link functionality with the game Bikuriman 2000 Viva Festiva. That's all I'm able to tell you really. I wasn't able to progress beyond the first area, nor did I particularly care to. The gameplay is rather uninteresting, but I suppose it's better than all those pointless Pachi-Slot games on here. The Last Blade Beyond the Destiny was the last SNK fighting game released for the handheld. It's the third and final game in the Last Blade series and is a sort of compilation of the previous two. It's actually surprisingly dense in terms of content and takes a while to unlock everything. You have to accrue points to buy scrolls in the gallery. There's extras in here, such as artwork and lore for all the characters. But the main point of interest are the minigames and endings. Purchasing a character's ending scroll allows you to play their Last Blade 2 story, and purchasing their second ending scroll usually unlocks a new character entirely. I wish this aspect was better explained by the game itself or the manual, because it's not exactly intuitive. The only way you'd know that a character has a new story is by discovering it upon a replay. The minigames also have weird unlock conditions. I've read online that one of them gets unlocked with every 2 hours of gameplay, but I've played significantly more than that now and don't have any of them. I was looking forward to playing those. I would say this game is very similar to Samurai Showdown, except with more of an emphasis on parries, or repel as it's called. You have two different types of fighting styles, power and speed, or strength and skill as the manual renders it as for some reason. The power types are better with those heavy, devastating strikes, while the speed types are better for combos. This game is my favourite survival mode of all of them, since it's the best way to earn a lot of points. You're given a mission at the start of every fight that you can choose to accept or not. It's usually something like reflect a certain number of times or use a certain level of attack. It's only after you've survived long enough that the more interesting ones start appearing, like having to fight an opponent with ×2 attack. Similar to Samurai Showdown, you're able to equip 2 abilities that will buff your stats. There's also a time attack mode. It's a game that just keeps giving you new stuff to do. We've come a long way since those early bare bones releases, haven't we? These now feel like proper console games with hours and hours of content. Fantastic Night Dreams Cotton by Success is yet another arcade conversion for the handheld. Unlike some of the others we've seen though, this is a one-for-one port that includes all the same levels, bosses, abilities and cutscenes as the original. It's technically very impressive, but it does come with its fair share of caveats. Everything has been scaled down quite a bit, as you'd expect. The Pocket can't handle nearly as much stuff on screen at once, so the enemy density can be a little sparse, almost to the point of feeling weirdly empty at times. The movement is also a lot slower, which can make some of the boss fights harder than they were originally. Other than this though, it's the classic arcade cute-em-up on the go. You shoot, drop bombs, and use magic. Cotton is aided by a fairy named Silk who serves as secondary fire. Both of them can be upgraded by collecting crystals that give you experience points. As is the tradition with these kinds of shooters, you lose everything when you run out of health and go back down to level 1. The maximum amount of continues you're allowed to start with is 9. There's no level select or save system to speak of, so once you get a game over it's right back to the beginning. At the very least, you don't get sent back to a checkpoint like in the arcade version. You're encouraged to play through it over and over again if you want to reach the ending. The difficulty is really strange and varies wildly. The levels themselves are easy enough, usually, but the bosses range from pushovers to absolutely brutal how the hell am I supposed to dodge this hell. It has a lot to do with the cramped screen size and aforementioned slower movement speed. You can make the game easier by playing it on an emulator with autofire turned on. This seems to be what everyone else is doing whenever I looked up any long plays of both this and the arcade version. This game had a small print run in Europe, and these copies go for a ridiculous amount of money. It's possibly one of the rarest games in the Pocket's library, rivaled only by chaotic wildcards like Picture Puzzle and Pocket Reversey. It's a good game that proves that the handheld was capable of replicating arcade games reasonably well. Personally, I find its cutscenes to be the main selling point. Memories Off Pure is a short prequel to the visual novel Memories Off, a popular and influential series by Kid that had many of these sorts of fan discs and sequels throughout the 2000s. The interesting thing about Memories Off is that its main heroine, Ayaka, the one plastered all over the promo material, dies long before the story even begins. It's actually about the protagonist moving on from her and trying to find love elsewhere. This prequel, though, explores their relationship while she was still around. Its narrative, therefore, is probably best enjoyed as a supplemental work for returning fans. Throughout the story, you can make decisions that will influence your affection for its two main heroines, Ayaka and Yui, and this will decide your ending. The scenario here can also be found included in most re-releases of Memories Off. The Ayaka ending is the most canonical one, of course, as this is the one that links up with the flashback scene in the first game. It was written by Kotaro Ichikoshi, a name we'll return to later when we look at the next kid game for the system. Picture Puzzle by Success is a Picross game. What more do I need to say, really? I can't even make this one funny. I quite enjoyed this one. Picross is pretty fun, and there's over 200 puzzles for you to solve. They gradually get more difficult. The early ones are on 5x5 grids, then it becomes 10x10, and finally 15x15. Those ones are very complicated, but have the most interesting pictures for you to fill in. There's a how to play option on the title screen, but it doesn't do a great job of explaining, to be honest. This game doesn't have a whole lot of personality to it. It's just Picross, and there's nothing really wrong with that. When I first started Dynamite Slugger, I was getting some major deja vu. Didn't I already play this one a bit ago, under the title Neo Poke Pro Yakyu? It's from the same developer, ADK, and the graphics are pretty much identical. Is this just an English language release of that game? Well no, as further inspection revealed. That game was strictly regional Japan teams, while this one is international and has teams from all around the world. Unlicensed though, without any real players, much like baseball stars. Something that immediately jumped out at me is the gulf in stats between the teams. America is an absolute beast compared to, say, Australia. If you want an easy mode, look no further than these extremely one-sided games. I'd say this one in general is a lot more accessible for new players. Home runs come far more frequently and are easy to pull off. In fact, my very first at-bat in this game was a home run. Some of the annoyances I complained about have been removed, like the dive when you're trying to catch the ball. It retains the good graphics and features of Neo Poke Pro Yakyu while being more approachable. I dare say this is the best baseball game on a handheld. I'm extremely mixed on Ganbare Neo Poke-kun. On one hand, there's a lot of stuff I really like about it, but on the other, it's far too esoteric and frustrating for me to recommend in any capacity. I'm getting ahead of myself though. It's a difficult game to classify. It's a sort of mix between an idle game and a Tamagotchi virtual pet, where you're watching over this guy named Poke-kun living in a small flat inside of your Neo Geo Pocket. Sort of Nasubi vibes. He's a game developer who gets depressed easily and only does work when he's in a good mood. Your objective, therefore, is to keep him happy so he can make us more minigames to play. A lot of these are inspired by classic retro games, which implies that Poke-kun is not very imaginative or original. Yeah, there's a layer of self-parody at work with Poke-kun that makes it hard to dislike. The entire thing feels like some kind of elaborate inside joke at SNK that was never seriously meant to be played to completion. The things you need to do to make this guy happy don't make a whole lot of sense. I just say it right now, I don't fully understand how its mechanics actually function, and neither does anyone else. If you go searching for guides online, you'll find all sorts of contradictory information, none of which is ever based on any empirical evidence that we can verify for ourselves. You don't control Poke-kun himself. It's unclear what the player's role is at all, but you're able to make things happen in the room with the clicky stick. All 4 directions do something different. Up turns the light on and off, right makes a hand reach through the letterbox, down makes insects start crawling on the floor, and left makes something light up in the top left of the room. Sometimes it says love, sometimes it gives you a scary face, and whatever the hell this is. Now you might be wondering what effect any of these have on Poke-kun, and yeah, no one really knows. He never even acknowledges them. I've read that putting on the light while he's pacing around the room like this makes him more likely to make games, but I'm not convinced. It's all abstract nonsense that seems entirely up to interpretation. Pressing the A button makes a guest enter the room. It's dependent on the time of day, but what you get is random. You can get something that will infuriate Poke-kun, mildly confuse him, or actually make him happy. Guess which one of those is the rarest to occur. The odds are heavily stacked against you. There are far more things that will make Poke-kun go insane and actually make him sit down and get some work done. You can also spin the stick around to make a catastrophe occur. This won't help you either, most of the time, but is good for a laugh and seeing some cool animations. Occasionally, Poke-kun will work if you press the B button to open up the minigame menu and exit back out again. Maybe. I've seen it happen enough times where I'm reasonably sure. If he's in a good mood, he packs up his stuff and gets to work. Each time this happens, new progress will be made on the minigames, represented by a percentage. If these minigames took considerably less time and effort to obtain, the game would be an easy recommendation. The sprite work is among some of the most charming on the handheld, and the sheer volume of it is genuinely impressive. There's so many secret animations to find. Even after so much playtime, I'm still seeing new ones pop up every now and then. There's a comfiness to Poke-kun's insular world that keeps you coming back day after day. However, I can only describe this as a toxic relationship that yields no benefits. Progress comes easy early on, but eventually becomes a drip feed. It's been, no hyperbole, years since the last time I saw him actually make any progress on a game. I keep coming back, but he's always too miserable to do anything. I'm tempted to say that my save file is dead at this point and that completion is forever out of reach. The game expects you to consistently trigger happy events to lift his mood. This is something that can only be done through save scumming, which is fairly trivial on an emulator but much more tedious on actual hardware. Poke-kun only seems to do so much work in a single day as well, so you either have to play this game over a long stretch of time or mess with the internal clock. In either case, what the game demands of you is simply unreasonable. Keeping this guy pleased is an uphill battle. Just existing is a big enough burden to dampen his spirits. Even if you use save states and only trigger happy events, he'll still get depressed and won't make games most of the time. It's a shame because the later games are the more interesting ones. The progression from these extremely basic breakout style games to something more graphically impressive is an ode to the history of game development. Maybe this is a reminder that that development didn't come without blood, sweat and tears. We often get a romanticized view on game development. Here though, we see it brought back down to earth as a tedious chore. A mind-numbing grind that will eventually drive you insane, just like Poke-kun himself. It's brilliant satire, and I hate it. Poke-kun rightfully became something of a mascot for the handheld in its twilight days. You can even find him as a card in Card Fighters 2, and I think it's very telling that his only ability here is to sap your opponent's spirit.
Bonjour! The King of Fighters! Battle Paradise!
Oh no, not a KOF-themed Mario Party clone. It's such a shitty genre of game that only kind of works in a very specific environment, when you have family and friends over and can't play a real game. The King of Fighters Battle the Paradise, or just Battle Paradise according to the announcer, is a perplexing title. It's not terrible or anything, but I do question what SNK were thinking when the idea was even conceived, let alone put into production. It could almost be justified if it attempted to fix some of the weak points of the Mario Party series, but it doesn't do that either. For those unaware, this is like a board game where you move according to the roll of a die. The objective is to earn coins so you can purchase stars. The player with the most stars at the end of the game is the winner. You pick a player character that represents you, and then a KOF character is your striker. They'll act on your behalf during the battle games and interactions. They can either be good or evil, and this will change what actions they're able to take. You can use the stars earned from games to upgrade them, which is recommended when you start tackling the harder maps later on. Some spaces activate a variety of boring minigames that will give or take coins depending on the outcome. I always groan whenever these start. You'd think they would be the main appeal, but they just feel like pointless filler a lot of the time. Also, I highly recommend setting the difficulty to easy. otherwise you will not be able to out-button mash the CPU. Skill will only get you so far though. You can use cards to mess with your opponent, but it mostly comes down to luck above all else. To be fair, this is kind of the point. You're not meant to take it that seriously. It's a silly party game best enjoyed with other people. As a single player experience, it's a miserable waste of time. The points you earn here can be transferred to the Dreamcast version of the King of Fighters 99. It was included in the Neo Geo Pocket Color Selection Volume 2 in its original Japanese format, but there's now a full fan translation that came out just in time for this video. I'm not a fan of this game myself, but still, I'm always happy to see new fan translations. Not only did the Pocket Color have the blue blur, but also the blue bomber, because those are totally real monikers that are associated with those characters and not just something game journalists like to pretend are real. Why do they call him a bomber anyway? I see him doing a lot of shooting, not really much in the way of bombing though. Anyway, this is the only game on the handheld developed by Capcom. Rockman Battle & Fighters isn't called Mega Man because it was never released outside of Japan, sadly. Had it come out a year prior in '99, I'm sure it would have been a flagship title that would have seen a worldwide release. But by the latter half of 2000, SNK had already abandoned its expeditionary efforts. I think Neo Poke-kun had driven them insane. It does actually go under the Mega Man title in the Neo Geo Pocket Color selection, although it remains untranslated, even though a complete fan translation already exists online. All of this probably contributed to the game being a bit obscure even among Mega Man fans. It's actually a collection of two arcade ports, Mega Man The Power Battle and Mega Man 2 The Power Fighters. These were part of a sub-series that took the Mega Man formula and turned it into an arcade fighting game of sorts. It's basically a boss rush where you get to choose a character and what order to fight the robots in. It can also be described as a best of the Mega Man series since it revisits many of the same boss fights. Each game has 3 routes that have slightly different plots and different robots to fight. The final bosses are also slightly different. The gameplay here is incredibly tight, true to the arcade games. You can slide and jump off of walls even if there's no walls to speak of. Every time you defeat a robot, you gain their weapon, which you can then use against subsequent bosses. Yeah, it's Mega Man, just without any of the platforming bits. It's fun, but unfortunately stays a little too true to its arcade origins. You're given unlimited continues and can just resume from where you died. I think this game would have been so much more interesting if dying sent you back to the start of fights. As it stands, you have to make up your own self-imposed challenges to get anything out of this. It's also missing the versus mode and co-op features from the arcade version. These very easily could have been included via the link cable, but all you're able to do with this is trade database information, like who cares? It looks and plays great, but I can't help but think that what it offers feels a little hollow, all things considered. A strange release for an already strange entry in a popular series. Enjoy the thrilling game of Baccarat, where you don't even play the game yourself and instead bet on a couple other geezers doing it. A game so beloved that James Bond hasn't played it since the 90s. It has mostly been replaced by the vastly superior Blackjack, which you can find in the aforementioned Neo 21. Seriously, why does this game exist? Was there really a demand for Baccarat on the Neo Geo Pocket? Neo Baccarat was the final game in the Pocket Casino series, thank God. You know what to expect by now. It retains the voice samples from Neo 21, but is otherwise uninteresting. What? Really? I've been informed it's pronounced Baccarat.
Bye-bye.
Ogre Battle Gaiden Prince of Zenobia is another fascinating title. Once again, we see SNK tackling genres outside of their forte and absolutely nailing it. In this case, they were making a handheld entry in Question Corporation's Ogre Battle series, which is perhaps best remembered for the 1995 strategy RPG Tactics Ogre. This entry though takes more after the mechanics of the first game, March of the Black Queen, and even acts as a side story to it, hence the Gaiden moniker. If you've played that game, which I haven't, then the gameplay should be familiar. You move your units across the map in real time and liberate towns and castles to rout the enemy. I love the voice samples they use for this.
Liberation!
Eventually, the enemies will start launching their own offensives, so it's important to leave some strength in reserve to defend your own strongholds. You're given a lot of freedom over how you go about setting up your units and their classes. It's usually a good idea to put your fighters in the front row and your bow and magic users in the back. They attack on their own during battle. The main thing you're able to do is give them support using tarot cards. These can cast magic, buff the stats of your allies, and maybe some other things I'm unaware of. They're a finite resource that are best saved for the stronger boss units that you come across. Graphically, it's quite unique. In battle, you have these really small sprites with limited colours, typical NGP graphics. But when they attack, they turn into much higher quality 16-bit sprites, something that looks straight out of the SNES games. Clearly, they were able to squeeze a lot out of the Neo Geo Pocket by this point. Ogre Battle Gaiden isn't some watered-down, compromised side game. It's a fully realised entry that packs a lot of content for its cartridge size. It was a big game for the system at the time that, by all rights, should have seen a worldwide release. Alas, SNK had already pulled out of the international market, so it remains a Japan exclusive. There is an unfinished fan translation available that still occasionally gets new updates though. So far, only the menus and early parts of the story have been translated. It's a shame because, by all accounts, its scenario is a substantial addition to the series. Koi Mahjong is not some kind of basketball amalgamation of the two games, it's a simple package that contains both Hanafuda and Mahjong. No bells and whistles. There's no tournament mode that has you defeating progressively tougher opponents, it's just free play and multiplayer. The perfect casual handheld experience, really. It's very approachable for new players as well, with a lot of assists for those who aren't too familiar with the rules of these games. Hanafuda shows you which cards you can match, and Mahjong shows you what tiles you need to win, as well as when you're able to declare Riichi. Graphically, there isn't too much to say. It's certainly one of the less ambitious Mahjong games on the handheld. However, I would say it's the better of the two Hanafuda games on here just because the cards are slightly bigger and easier to read. The menu music is also quite pleasant. Metal Slug's second mission is a very special game on the handheld. It was the final game released in the US market, making it a swan song for the Neo Geo Pocket in that region. It was also the last game on the handheld to use the huge 4MB cartridge, a sign we're in for an epic. It greatly expands on the first game with a whopping 38 missions in total, over twice as many as first mission. And just like that game, you won't see them all in a single playthrough. The route will once again branch depending on your success or failure during missions. In other words, whether you're able to keep the Metal Slug, the Slug Flyer, or the newly added Slug Sub from getting destroyed. The sequences that follow their destruction are now slightly different. They got rid of that confusing parachute part, thank God. The difficulty is higher this time around, so seeing the secret routes can be something of a pain. Fortunately, they now let you save at the start of missions instead of only on the game over screen. These alternate paths you can take through the story are one of my favourite aspects of these games. Missions don't always go as planned. Sometimes you need to improvise and make the most of a bad situation. Your commanding officer even acknowledges your failure if you end up getting shot down twice in a row. These little radio calls between missions adds a lot of flavour that was missing from the first one. There's a bit more story and characterisation for the two protagonists, Gimlet and Red-Eye. Red-Eye in particular has some pretty funny dialogue. She's adorable, best Metal Slug girl. Besides the different cutscenes, they also have their own exclusive weapons. Red-Eye has the rocket launcher and Gimlet has the shotgun. Here's a bit of trivia. The manual erroneously claims that these two are Marco and Theo for some reason. It's like whoever wrote this didn't even look at the game. Anyway, you now have an incentive to play through the missions since there's an extra character to unlock. He's actually just one of the enemy grunts, but still, it's pretty cool. The rescue list has also been expanded upon and gives the game more replayability. There's an entire screen where you can keep track of them all. Some of them will tell you things if you're a sufficient rank. It's a huge step up in terms of content. The aliens and fat debuff from the arcade games is here, as well as that iconic voice that plays whenever you pick up a weapon.
Heavy machine gun!
You can turn it off in the options to stop it from interrupting other sounds, just like in Puyo Pop, but leaving it on isn't terribly disruptive. The gameplay is more refined. It fixes most of the annoyances from first mission, like the uninterruptible grenade throw animation. The option button now throws grenades instead of switching your weapon to them. This is an improvement, but you still have to press that crappy option button in the middle of battle. And now you can't even pause the game without throwing a grenade. Oh, what I wouldn't give for a third face button. Another significant change is the health bar. You're now limited to just 3 hit points even for vehicles, and it doesn't level up with your rank. This is probably my least favourite change, but it does make the game harder if you're into that. It is a lot more annoying this time around though. The Metroidvania style levels are still here, but are now populated with aggressively respawning enemies. They only respawned when you left the room in the first, but now they respawn the second they're off screen. Any section with the mounted machine gun is a massive pain. I've never been able to figure out how to get on it consistently. It's so finicky to the point of being detrimental to you. Lastly, the minecart sections are absolutely horrendous and should have never been included. You can almost feel a bit of that Metal Slug 4 bullshit starting to rear its ugly head here. It's nowhere near that bad though. Overall, Second Mission is an excellent game that improves on the first and is highly replayable. Evolution Eternal Dungeons is a port of the Dreamcast JRPG Evolution: The World of Sacred Device, an underrated dungeon crawler by the developer Sting. We've seen a few games now that are just conversions of existing games, but this one is the most interesting to me. It's the same story and even the gameplay is similar, but it's fundamentally a different experience. You take control of Mag Launcher and his mysterious companion Linear Cannon as they plunder ruins for artifacts to sell. This is important because Mag inherited his family's rather sizable debt to the organisation that appraises them. Every time you finish a dungeon, some of the reward money goes towards paying off this debt. Unless you're using Mag's loyal butler, Green Aid, your third party member will also take a cut of your earnings. There's Chain Gun and Pepperbox. Yeah, everyone's named after weapons in this series, just go with it. The original made you carefully consider whether to keep exploring a dungeon and risk losing your loot or leave and save your game. Eternal Dungeons is similar, but since it's a handheld game you're allowed to save anywhere, essentially missing the entire point. Weirdly, it still has the save points right before the boss rooms, even though they're functionally redundant in this version. However, the dungeon crawling is much more difficult because it's now locked to a grid. In the console game, it was far easier to just run past enemies. You can't really do that here. Once they become aware of your presence, they immediately make a beeline straight towards you. But they can only move when you move. This often leads to something I like to call the enemy conga line, where you have loads of enemies following you from one tile behind. This makes the items that turn you invisible, or the ones that reveal parts of the map, much more useful. You'll want to make as much progress as you can while not exhausting all of your resources on the way there. They convey the same idea, but the execution gives an entirely different flavour. I think both have their strengths and weaknesses. I like that this version periodically upgrades your maximum inventory space, as something that was painfully absent from the Dreamcast game. In any case, Eternal Dungeons has that dungeon crawling goodness that I crave. It is far and away the best honest-to-goodness dungeon crawler on the handheld with everything you could possibly want. It has one of my favourite mechanics: randomly generated floors that keep you guessing no matter how many times you play it, and a post-game that encourages you to explore a seemingly never-ending grind dungeon. I've never found my way to the bottom of this thing in either version, to be honest. You spend the entire game trying to pay off your debt, and when you finally succeed, they dump an even bigger one on you in this post-game. It's so funny I can't even be mad at it. And yes, I did end up paying off that one too. The battle system is pretty fun and retains the formation system from the Dreamcast game, Characters in the front will deal more damage, while the ones in the back will have higher defense. This is mostly where you want to stick Linear, since she's the healer, and because she never figures out how to use a weapon that's not a frying pan. She would get along swimmingly with the maid from Pocket Tennis. However, since most spells work as a horizontal line, there's advantages to keeping them together as well. Characters unlock new skills using TP you get from battles. The Cypher-Aim equipped characters, on the other hand, have slots that can be equipped with different parts. These have their own set of skills that can be upgraded with cash. I usually just pick 1 or 2 of them and stick with them to the end. I think my biggest complaint with the battles in this game is that the enemies almost always get the first few turns, even if you're much higher level than they are, and even if you initiate the battle. Throw in the fact that they're partially using status ailments on you, and you have the perfect recipe for frustration. I appreciate the higher difficulty though, particularly when it comes to the boss fights, which can be very strategic indeed. This alone elevates it above many of the other JRPGs on this system. There is a major flaw that I feel needs addressing though. The final dungeon only has a finite amount of enemies, meaning you can softlock yourself on the final boss if you didn't grind to a sufficient level beforehand. This problem didn't exist in the Dreamcast version since some of the enemies respawn if you left the area. I love the Evolution games. They're not revolutionary or anything, they're just simple adventures with fun, likeable characters. Kind of like Unitron, there isn't much plot in this until you get to the last act of the story. However, it does a much better job at setting this up by having many scenes with the main villain. A guy who has some creepy pervert vibes whenever he interacts with Linear. That's one way to make me hate him, I guess. Mag and Linear are an underrated duo, and I love seeing their tender relationship develop across the series. The second game was a little disappointing though, I think I prefer this one. Cool Cool Jam is a sort of companion to the Dreamcast game Cool Cool Tune. It's a rhythm game where you explore a musical themed world trying to put together your own band so you can return home. I'm not sure of the exact specifics of the story, but that's the basic gist. You have to go around talking to people and impress them with your playing. This begins a mini-game where you have to press the button when a big dot appears. The music in the overworld is good, but when it comes time to strum along, there's a lot to be desired. It's very gimmicky and has you treating the handheld like an instrument. Depending on the instrument, you'll have to hold it in different ways. The guitar has you holding it upside down, for example. It's a neat idea that doesn't work very well and just ends up confusing you. It also makes it impossible to play on an emulator. Cool Cool Jam is at its best when you're exploring its incredibly colourful world. Every area is themed after a different genre of music. The art style is fantastic. Sadly, it's another game that's impenetrable unless you can read Japanese. There exists an official demo in English that was sent out to reviewers back in the day, but it only translates the tutorial area. It's a shame. Its gameplay isn't the best, but I can easily see myself being won over by its bizarre setting and characters. Delta Warp is one of the most unique and interesting games that was released for the handheld. It was the one and only game developed by Iosis. No, not the Dojin Circle that makes Toho music. The used phone shop that goes by the same name. It's still around to this day, apparently. The game itself is just as strange as its origins. It's a mind-bending puzzle game where you play as this right-angled triangle and must collect delta power units from the tiles on the ground. There's black and white ones that can only be collected by the black and white sides of your triangle. It's a bit odd referring to the player character as a triangle, so I'm just going to call him Jim. Jim is able to flip himself over the tiles, but he can also move across them horizontally with the buttons. It sounds simple enough, but it doesn't stay that way for very long. Many levels have multiple floors that you must carefully navigate without falling out of bounds. There are also some tiles that you can only pass over once or twice, making it very easy to render some levels unwinnable. Every stage is made up of 10 levels, the last one of which is the only one that has a time limit. These are like the boss fights that push you to use everything you've learned to complete the level as quickly as possible. There's some cool looking space animations considering it's an otherwise abstract puzzle game without much in the way of plot. Across its impressive 100 levels, they push the mechanics to its absolute limit. Everything that could be done with them is, and this is the main reason I never ended up finishing it. It's simply too lengthy for its own good, and the latter half of the game expects a level of mastery that really reveals its main flaw. A moment ago I mentioned how the buttons move you across the tiles. Well, the A button moves you left and the B button moves you right. This makes sense since it corresponds to the sides the buttons are on, but because of the top-down perspective it rarely corresponds to what's on screen. Jim's left and right becomes out of sync with the buttons. They become flipped if Jim is upside down. They become up and down when Jim is on his side. All it takes is one moment of getting your wires crossed to accidentally rotate Jim into oblivion. Poor Jim. I find that it helps if you rotate the handheld so that Jim's ass is pointing down relative to your own left and right, but this is not something you can do in those timed levels, and those time limits eventually become very tight. Tighter than Jim's clenched arse cheeks navigating these complex levels, no doubt. I don't think it's very intuitive, sadly, and this leads to a lot of hesitation and weariness. This game is otherwise excellent, and I want to love it, but I find myself ever so slightly uncomfortable in its presence. Like Jim is constantly giving me the evil eye or something. I don't like it. On second thought, let's not anthropomorphize the triangle. Interestingly, even though this game was never released outside of Japan, it features full English text. There's also a level editor where you can create your own overly complicated Delta Warp levels to share with friends. Friends that obviously have a Neo Geo Pocket, a link cable, and a copy of Delta Warp. Infinity Cure is a game that requires some context. It can be considered a handheld fan disc to the PSX visual novel Infinity, also known as Never 7, The End of Infinity in later releases. It's the first entry in kids' beloved Infinity series, which also includes Ever 17 and Remember 11. It's known for its mind-bending sci-fi plots that are uniquely tailored to the visual novel format. They simply wouldn't work in any other medium. This is a particular strength of one of its lead scenario writers, Kotaro Ichikoshi, who would later go on to create similarly cerebral experiences with the Zero Escape series. We're getting ahead of ourselves, however, as the first iteration of Infinity was a bit more restrained and formulaic. It's about a bunch of college kids at an island seminar where some strange events start to occur. The protagonist begins to have premonitions of the future where one of his classmates or new friends dies at the end of the week. In the original PSX game though, these supernatural events take a backseat to its 5 main heroines. It's more of a gal game, a dating sim where your route is determined by who you spend the most time with. Let me tell you about Izumi Morino. She's not the main poster girl, that would be Yuka, but she's one of my favourites. She's one of those Yamato Nadeshiko types, you know the kind. Those mature, gentle and motherly older women types that have a captivating grace to them. They're usually played by Kikuko Inoue, and Izumi is no exception. Oh my god, look at that portrait. Isn't she wonderful? Ah, Izumi. I promise I'm actually going somewhere with this, because fans of Izumi got a bit of a raw deal in the original game. Compared to the other heroines, her route felt like kind of a joke. It was too short and introduced contradictory story elements that were never elaborated on. It was funny seeing them gaslight their friend for an entire week though. Anyway, this finally brings us to Infinity Cure in the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which seems to have been made to rectify these issues. It expands Izumi's route into something much more substantial, while also offering a proper explanation of the original game's mystery. It's here where we start to see what Uchikoshi would later become known for, as he begins to introduce plot twists that completely flip your understanding of the story and characters. Infinity Cure features a good chunk of the common route from the original visual novel, but leaves out Haruka, Saki and Kurumi's routes. This limits the branching story to just Izumi's new route and an alternate version of Yuka's route from the original game. Both of these were later included in a definitive edition for the Dreamcast and PC called Never 7, which is how I'm able to talk about this, by the way. The NGP version was never translated into English, but Never 7 was, first by fans and then officially not too long ago. In any case, this version of the game is now a bit redundant. It's cool to see all of its character portraits redrawn to fit on the handheld, but you're missing the voice acting and a lot of the CGs. The backgrounds are the least impressive part of the package. They look like something from the original Game Boy with how little detail there is. In retrospect, it was a strange decision to make what is effectively the conclusion to this PS1 game an NGP exclusive, even if it was only for a limited time. Its writing does deliver where the original faltered though. It took the most undercooked route of the bunch and turned it into this epic grand final that Azumi always deserved. I'm a fan of Never 7. It's a good early VN with some quality heroines. It's not quite on the same level as Ever 17, but still it's a solid start to a fantastic series. Nige-ron-pa is a JRPG by Denno Aizo, the developers of Hell Knight, a game I reviewed not too long ago. It takes place in the fantasy land of Nige-ron-pa, where humans and strange creatures coexist. You play as an elf girl named Ryo, who is aspiring to be some kind of adventurer, called World Workers. She and her friend Momo set out at the beginning to acquire a license so they can open their own headquarters and tackle jobs. Not even fantasies free from bureaucracy. Some of these are mandatory for the main quest, but there are also optional ones that you can complete for rewards. Those ones typically have a time limit. Days pass if you sleep at an inn or move around on the overworld. This seems to be the only purpose behind the in-game calendar. It's not like there's a change of seasons or anything. A lot of the game has a light-hearted tone, and a plot that's mostly about aimlessly wandering around and getting into shenanigans. One of the subplots is them becoming models for a manga artist. Only towards the end do we start seeing actual stakes and the main villain being introduced. At least that's how it appeared to me. This game was never released outside of Japan, but there exists a terrible English fan translation that was abandoned over a decade ago. It starts out coherent enough, but eventually devolves into utter machine translation nonsense that makes the Dark Arms translation look like a masterpiece in comparison. While it does translate the story from beginning to end, it doesn't translate everything. Occasionally you'll see a line of dialogue that appears as line something or other. This to me is far more intrusive than if they just left it in Japanese. Everyone has their main squeeze BFF and then their two translate friends. It's so real for this. Jokes aside, figuring out what to do while playing this was a nightmare. The only reason I made it to the end was because of this Let's Play by the channel Were1974. Even though I had no clue what was going on most of the time, I still ended up loving Ryo and Momo. Their positive energy shines through even a broken translation. The character portraits are one of the highlights of the graphics. It feels like you can leave the opening going forever and it never seems to run out of weird creatures to show you. Wow, who was the character designer for this? What? The main appeal is that you can actually recruit every single one of these characters into your party when you establish your headquarters. This is when the game really opens up and lets you mess around. You post recruitment ads and wait for people to respond. They may not even be people. They could be machines, animals, monsters, things that shouldn't even be able to respond to a recruitment ad. A lot of these are absolutely useless in terms of stats, but the unpredictability is a lot of fun. It can be annoying though when you recruit someone and then a much better version of them shows up later. There's a mechanic where party members can leave if they become too unsatisfied. They all have different personalities. This determines what actions will or won't lower their patience, which is indicated by the cool number on the status screen. If it gets low, they'll start to complain, and if it's high, they'll mention how they're in a good mood. They may even give you an item when this happens. However, it's a really underdeveloped mechanic that's easy to trivialize. Their cool raises each time you rest at an inn, and you can do this as many times as you want until it's back to 99. This essentially makes their personalities rather meaningless from a gameplay perspective. It all comes down to your own imagination since they don't actually show up in any of the cutscenes. This is purely the domain of Ryo, Momo, and the other characters that you come across. That's fine though. It is a role-playing game, so you're meant to invest yourself into the world and come up with your own stories sometimes. Frustratingly, there's a point of no return in the final dungeon, as I discovered when I booted up my old save file. This is an unforgivable sin in a game that only has one save slot. If you wanted to have more fun doing the side quests and grinding to level 99, I guess you're just out of luck. Your adventure is at its end. The actual gameplay of Nige-ron-pa feels like a huge afterthought. It's one of the most brainless battle systems I think I've ever seen. Most of the time, you'll just be spamming the attack button to end the fight as quickly as possible, because you're almost never in any real danger past the early parts of the game. Enemies do damage in the single digits. Even the final boss can't even muster something worth using a healing spell for. Your magic is determined by the job you have equipped to a character. Strangely, a job is like a piece of equipment that can be freely passed around to everyone. You can get more of them by collecting things, but really, a party full of bruisers is all you'll ever need. Annoyingly, if an enemy dies while another ally was targeting them, they skip their turn instead of redirecting the attack. This drags out battles far longer than they should be. Regardless, my soul yearns for a completely brainless JRPG like this every now and then. It's like comfort food. It's only been like a year since I finished this, and I'm already nostalgic for its title screen music. The director of this game was Aya Kyogoku, who would later join Nintendo and direct many titles in the Animal Crossing franchise. I think it's safe to say she knows a thing or two about making a comfy, relaxing game. Wrestling games. I've never liked them much due to what I consider to be fundamentally flawed game design. Wrestling isn't a real fight where two guys are doing everything in their power to win. If it was, they'd just resort to punching each other in the face instead of jumping from the top rope like a showboating prat. That stuff is okay though, because it's telling a story. It's meant to be showy and larger than life. It's walking this fine line between believability and spectacle. Wrestlers, first and foremost, must entertain a crowd. When turned into a game, however, your objective no longer aligns with this. It becomes solely about winning rather than entertaining some imaginary audience. Showy, exciting spectacle steps aside for boring practicality. This is the inescapable truth of the wrestling game genre, one that plagues every example I've ever seen, and Big Bang Pro Wrestling is no exception. It's also clearly a game that was designed with multiplayer in mind, because it doesn't play well against an AI opponent. Regular fighting games have issues with the CPU as well. It often reads your inputs and reacts to them in a way that no human would be able to, but at least you can actually tell what they're doing. Most of this game is based around inputs that are hidden from the player, giving the CPU a huge advantage. For example, when you enter a grapple, the first input is given priority, and you better believe the CPU is faster than your pathetic human digits. Grappling is your main means of performing wrestling moves, so it feels like most of the game is down to a coin flip. You do have some attacks that are more reliable though, and anything you do to your opponent while they're on the ground can't be reversed, except for maybe some of the submissions. As far as wrestling games go, this one is pretty simple and easy to figure out. Once your character's name starts flashing, you're able to press both A and B together to perform their special move. It's not a one-time use or anything, you can just spam it forever. In my experience, it's very difficult to actually win by pinfall. Submissions are much more reliable and don't really have any drawbacks. At the very least, the AI won't cheat to escape from these. There's a few different match stipulations. No tag teams though. We have Deathmatch, a no disqualification free-for-all where you can hit some chair shots. There's the Coffin Match, which you just win by using an Irish whip by the ropes. And finally, the Reward Match. It's Money in the Bank under a different name. This one is absolutely terrible. You can hit your opponent with like 10 finishers and they still won't let you climb up there unmolested. This is another instance of the AI cheating with button inputs too. If they grab you, you have to quickly mash the A button to get rid of them. Something easier said than done. It's by far the hardest match type and becomes frustratingly common in the latter half of the story mode, the IEW Championship. This mode doesn't actually end when you win the title. You then have to defend it against everyone you've already defeated, and then the old champ returns to challenge your title reign. It's very much a wrestling story with a lot of the beats you might expect. The ending credits though feel like something else entirely. You get all these cool bits of artwork that act as a satisfying epilogue for your character. It's my favourite part. The promos some of these guys cut are pretty funny too, just because of how lame they are. Banal banter, really? There's a lot of content in this game. There's 10 completely fictional wrestlers to choose from, some of which are clearly based on real people. Dietz is just straight up The Undertaker, for instance. In addition to its story, there's a tournament mode that allows you to simulate matches with a CPU. It's the kind of mode that invites you to tell your own stories with these wrestlers. Graphically, it's fantastic. One of the most impressive looking games on the handheld for sure. By all rights, it should be a great game, but it's let down by the fact that it's a wrestling game. And wrestling games just kind of have bad gameplay by their very nature. This one somehow has all the disadvantages of a wrestling game and a 2D beat-em-up. Actually moving yourself onto the same horizontal plane as your opponent is way harder than it should be. I was grappling with this more than my actual opponent. I just don't think it's a very fun game, at least when played against a CPU. It's all pretty shallow. This is another one of those games that's fully translated into English despite never being released outside of Japan. I'm breaking chronology for this one, since these weren't all released back to back like I'm presenting them here, but splitting them up would just be counterintuitive. Arusei decided to dump a bunch of these copy and paste Pachi-Slot games on the failing handheld in its twilight days, starting with Hanabi and ending with the golf-themed E-Cup. I'd rather be playing Neo Turf Masters. This is known as the Pachi-Slot Arusei Okoku Pocket series. There are 8 of these, and they're all basically the same game with some minor aesthetic differences. Some different sounds and visuals here and there. Oh Hanabi is a sequel to Hanabi, so it has even less things to make it stand apart. I can't really give these games their own separate reviews because I would just be repeating myself. I mean sure, they were all released as separate cartridges and that technically makes them different games, but come on. I've said all I needed to already, so let's just go through them as a nice little montage. Super Real Mahjong is a long-running series by Sega Corporation that's been going since the 80s. There are loads of these games at this point, and they still occasionally get new entries and re-releases. You might be wondering how that's even possible, but this isn't any old Mahjong series. It mixes in elements of the dating sim genre by having a large cast of leading ladies for you to play against. Still not convinced? Well, I forgot to mention that their version of Mahjong is a little more risque. Every time you win, they take off an article of clothing. That's in the main series proper anyway. I don't imagine this Neo Geo Pocket Color iteration has such spicy content. I mean, it's on a handheld game system. I know we're not boy, but surely SNK were not based enough to allow borderline hentai content on their platform. But then again, this was before the formation of the Japanese rating system, Zero. One of the worst things to ever happen to the Japanese gaming industry. You couldn't even have Hitler in a game anymore without giving him a cool pair of shades. Well, I'm dragging my heels here, but I guess there's only one way to find out, isn't there? Oh my god! The Mad Lads actually did it, breasts on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. No bush though. This alone makes it the best Mahjong game on the system. It's a high quality title. There's 7 heroines to play against and these story segments between games. Frustratingly, there doesn't seem to be a way to save your progress. At least as far as I'm aware anyway. I assume it must be hidden in there somewhere. Surely they don't expect you to play through it all in one sitting without any game overs. But then again, the difficulty is on the unforgiving side. You would think that the strip Mahjong game of all things would be a tad more casual, but this series is known for being absolutely brutal. The AI is actually rather infamous for cheating. You can sit down at the table and lose before you even have a chance to greet the dealer. I'm not ashamed to admit that we made liberal use of save states throughout. And when I say we, I'm talking about my friend me, who is the only one among us who knows how to play Mahjong. Shout out to him for helping me throughout this video.
Got like a really cool setup here, where not only do we have the 7 pairs, right? But we've also got sequential numbers, because we got 7, 8, 9, right? But we got like 2 pairs of 7, 8, 9. In fact, we've got like the same thing happening, but also with 4, 5, 6. So we got two groups of 4, 5, 6.
I have no fucking clue what he was talking about there. Super Real Mahjong Premium Collection is an impressive title with some pretty good graphics and music. If you must have one Mahjong title for the handheld and aren't intimidated by its difficulty, then you can't go wrong. At last, we've arrived at the end of our journey. The final game that was ever released for the Neo Geo Pocket. Most of the time, these aren't the most well-remembered or lauded titles in a system's library. They're usually cheap shovelware made to get one last sale out of its dwindling user base. Even the mighty PS2, the best game console there ever was, didn't receive the proper send-off it deserved. It didn't go out with a bang, but with a whimper in the form of a bog-standard annual football game. Such a fate was surely in store for the humble Neo Geo Pocket Color. By this point, SNK wasn't doing too well financially. Arusai had purchased them the previous year and had started liquidating many of their assets, including their overseas divisions. This is why many prominent Neo Geo Pocket titles simply went unreleased in the rest of the world. Throughout much of 2001, the writing was on the wall. The end of SNK was nigh, and with it, the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Arusai continued to support the handheld with those copy and paste pachinko games we looked at. Following Super Real Mahjong in March though, there would be nothing for almost half a year. SNK still made sure to send the handheld off in a bang though.
Card Fighters 2!
Just before their bankruptcy, they released one final game with SNK vs Capcom Card Fighters 2 Expand Edition, a fantastic sequel to one of the best games on the handheld. Of course, there was no release outside of Japan. I doubt there was any interest overseas to begin with. Even I had moved on by this point. My NGP had probably become lost in my sock drawer somewhere. Fortunately, Card Fighters 2 has been fully patched into English by fans. For the longest time, it was one of the only fully complete fan translations for the handheld that felt like an official release. I mean, it's not perfect, but neither were some of the official translations. Even in Japan though, I can't imagine there was much more interest. It's a release that feels more like a thank you and dismissal of service to the handheld's last remaining holdouts. This is most likely why it didn't receive 2 versions like the first game. There's only one version, and you can choose either an SNK or Capcom deck at the start. My feelings on this game ping-ponged quite a bit as I played it. At times, I felt like it was a fantastic evolution of the first game that does a great job at improving its formula, while at others, I found myself thinking that it was a lifeless slog that loses a lot of the magic. By the end, these feelings coalesced into a mild, it's okay, maybe even really good, just not as good as the first game. I think my main issue is that the world just isn't as interesting anymore. You can't walk around, talk to NPCs, and find loads of fun references. Places now just exist to convey the story in a pretty standard text box format. There is an overworld that you can wander around, but there isn't a whole lot to it. It just exists for you to walk from place to place to trigger key story battles. During the first half of the game, you don't even have access to the card shop and trade machine either. And there's only one of each, by the way. The setting was one of my favourite parts of the first game, so seeing it downgraded like this was incredibly disappointing. The story has a completely different vibe to it as well. It's the kind of thing you would see in a card-themed anime of the era, really. And there's a lot of wacky slapstick and colourful characters. The story to the first game felt refreshing in that it didn't really have a villain or any major stakes. There was a card tournament, and you wanted to win it, but there's nothing in the way of cliched villains whose plans hinged entirely on the results of a children's card game. The sequel, on the other hand, goes in this direction. There's a masked trickster called Neo Mantle going around stealing people's cards, and it's up to you and your classmate to stop him. It's a fun story for what it is, I'm not knocking it. There's more actual characterization going on, even for the returning characters. And I do enjoy Hiruna, she's a lot of fun. So this guy is actually based on G-Mantle, an obscure, deep-cut SNK character that showed up in some old games and advertisements. That's enough about the characters though, you want to hear about the card game. It's just as addictive as ever and gets an expansive makeover with over 100 new cards. On the Capcom side, we get stuff from Rival Schools, Dino Crisis and Onimusha. I never managed to get any cards from those last two, frustratingly enough. Impressively, even most of the returning cards have completely new artwork from a bunch of different artists. I don't think a lot of it is as strong as the first games though. There's also the introduction of a completely different type of card, the reaction card. These can only be played in response to your opponent's attack. They allow you to have those oh so satisfying "you've just activated my trap card" moments. I like these things, but I also hate them, because the CPU is far better at utilising them than I am. It will rarely miss an opportunity to mess you up if it has the means to do so, and will usually avoid any traps you try to lead it into. If it knows you have a certain reaction card, it will make sure that you never have the chance to use it, which ended up making them feel less relevant than I would have liked. They completely changed the balance of the game by punishing overly offensive playstyles. And as someone with an overly offensive playstyle, I take offense. It's a lot harder than the first one, especially by the endgame, which I have mixed feelings on. It does have some of the most intense, nail-biting card battles of the entire series, but it also makes it much grindier as well. I spent far too much of my playtime refighting the same opponents over and over again for better cards, in hopes of getting a deck good enough to go toe-to-toe with the final boss. This was a bit of a problem in the first game as well, but not nearly to the same extent. At the very least, the game knows you're going to do this and rewards you with S rarity cards. As a sequel, I have issues with it, but as a swan song for the Neo Geo Pocket, it couldn't be any better, honestly. As the credits rolled, I reflected on this journey that we've been on. So many different games from so many different genres. Some good, some bad, and some just unremarkable. Something they all have in common though is that they exist within the confines of this handheld's small software library. What was once an exciting promise of things that existed beyond Sonic Pocket Adventure has at last been given tangible form. In other words, that spark of mystery that set me on this journey in the first place has, finally, after over 20 years, been extinguished. It's both a satisfying and slightly melancholic feeling to end things on, isn't it? We'll never again discover something new. Or will we? You can find some homebrew games if you go looking for them, but there's just one problem. They all kind of suck. This is never a very popular platform, so its homebrews are mostly unfinished tech demos. Proof of concepts of what could have been if someone else carried the torch. But no one ever did. Even the ports of classic games only exist in this half-finished slapdash state. There also exists a cancelled and unreleased sequel to the 1990 arcade game Magician Lord. Footage of it was leaked online in 2012 by a private collector, but sadly, as of writing this video, it's never been dumped, and likely never will. So for now, I will put down my Neo Geo Pocket and play something else. I hear the Game Boy has some pretty decent games. I might check some of those out later. Remember to join the channel membership to see videos early and get bonus ones, and also get your name in the end card here. As always, a special shout out to my channel members and patrons. And I've been Snickety Slice, I'll see you around.